Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the January 22nd, 2025 Pine-Richland School Board Joint Governance Meeting. I'd like to call the meeting to order at this time. And then moving to item 2.01, which is a review of pulled batch policies, triple odd local board procedures. I believe we have 6 of these, and I'll go through them. Mrs. Turchuk, I believe you pulled 3 of these. Mrs. Hillman, you pulled 1, and then there were 2 late additions that were pulled. Mrs. Brusalis, I believe one of them was pertaining to a recent court action, so I think you can explain that when the time comes. I'll call upon each board member who pulled the policy for their initial comments or amendments to the policy if they have any amendments, and we'll go through the proper process of making an amendment, getting it seconded, and then having a discussion. Once discussion is over with, then we can go through a vote on that potential change. So the ones that we have is 003 functions, which was recently pulled after the meeting was scheduled. Mrs. Brusalis. 004 membership, Amy had pulled that one. 006 meetings, Lisa. 006.1 attendance at meetings via electronic communications, Mrs. Turchuk did that. 011 principles of governance and leadership, Mrs. Turchuk pulled that one for discussion. And then the recent addition was the 005 PR current organization. There are some PSBA changes in this one too. Mrs. Williams provided us with those red line changes, so we will probably talk through those too as well during this meeting. I'll ask, let's make sure we keep our comments germane to the recommended word changing on any changes that are suggested for any of these policy. Also, we have the DECIDE model in front of us. I think we're always trying to follow the DECIDE model throughout this process tonight. Make sure we work together with civility and cooperation so we can move through these effectively. There are no time limits this evening. However, I'd really like to make sure everyone is allowed to speak at least once before speaking a second time, so we give everybody a chance to make any comments that they so like. Okay? All right, let's move on to the first one, which is a 003 functions. Mrs. Brusalis, you pulled that one first before the meeting was scheduled, so I'll let you take that one first.
Yeah, I just have a couple of changes, and maybe I can just run through what those are quickly before I guess make a motion to make those changes. The first one would be under executive. And my rationale for this particular change is our policies are a window into the structure and operations of our school district. So I just thought we could clarify here in the first paragraph. My recommended change is the board shall exercise its executive power by the appointment of a district superintendent, who shall, and this is the change, act as the chief administrator of the school district and shall be directly responsible to the board, period. He or she shall enforce the statutes of the Commonwealth, the regulations of the State Board of Education, the policies of the board, and all other applicable laws and regulations. That would be that change. The second change that I'd like to propose is to the second paragraph, adding on at the end a sentence that reads, the board reserves the right to review, alter, or rescind any and all administrative regulations that the superintendent is required to promulgate pursuant to the requirements of any policy adopted by the board. The third change would be eliminating the first sentence, which much of that is captured by the one I just read, and then starting that third paragraph, the board reserves the right to direct revisions of such administrative regulations when it considers the regulations to be inconsistent with board policy or district practices, leaving the rest the same. And then finally, the last change I'd like to propose is the last paragraph, evaluation of board procedure, changing the last paragraph to read, the board may plan an evaluation of its functions as a board. The board may evaluate procedures, relationships, or activities, or focus on a particular area or issue. The board president or his or her designee, working with the superintendent and in consultation with the remaining school directors, may develop the plan to evaluate its functions as a board. That would be all of my changes. Shall I make a motion for the first one. So I'd like
Yes.
to make a motion to amend the policy, starting with the first one. First paragraph under executive, strike the whole paragraph just to make it easy and replace it with, the board shall exercise its executive power by the appointment of a district superintendent, comma, who shall act as the chief administrator of the school district and shall be directly responsible to the board, period. He or she shall enforce the statutes of the Commonwealth, comma, the regulations of the State Board of Education, comma, the policies of the board, comma, and all other applicable laws and regulations, period.
Okay, so I've got to capture what you're saying here so I can make sure I repeat this back in play. So the board shall exercise its executive power by the appointment of a district superintendent, comma. That's already in there, so that stays. After the comma, who shall, and this is where the change comes in, act as the chief administrator of the school district. What else? I don't have.
And shall be directly responsible to the board, period.
Be directly
What's after directly?
responsible to the board.
Period. And then
Period.
the next sentence starts, he or she shall, and then the rest of the paragraph stays. He or she shall enforce the statutes, et cetera.
Okay. Shall enforce the statutes, okay, as it reads. So really, the only change is to add the statement in of the first sentence is act as the chief administrator of the school district and shall be directly responsible to the board.
Yeah, and then it's just the phrase he, she shall.
Yeah, he, she shall enforce the statutes as it reads. So you're inserting that in there. Okay. So that's your motion?
Yes.
Okay, do you have a second on that?
I'll second.
Okay, so we have a motion. Hope everybody has got, did they all understand that change? You're able to write that down? Barb,
I have it written, but if I can get your notes.
just to make sure?
That would
Okay.
be great.
All right,
Thank you.
open up for discussion?
Well, I'll go ahead. I'd like to just, the part that I'm a little bit unsure about is directly responsible to the board, and maybe Mr. Hoffman can kind of weigh in that, like how that would, I guess I would need just a little more context and how that would work compared to how things are operating currently, and your thoughts on that.
I guess my only reaction to it is in the organizational chart, which I don't know if it's on the or attachment to any of these policies. The superintendent does report to the board. I'm not, just on its face, I'm not sure that.
Yeah, I didn't hear anything that was any different than what we do currently. So, I think for many of the changes in the zeros, I would just ask, just as Amy just did, do you have any concerns with that, Mr. Hoffman? And if you don't, then certainly I wouldn't. When I think about the board and having worked with 25 board members over my time at Pine-Richland, the authority rests with the board, not individual board members. So my only comment would be I'm responsible to the board, and the board functions when it functions as a whole.
Okay. Other comments? Okay. No further comments. We'll take a vote. All in favor of that change? Let me read the change again, just because we had some discussions. So we would change the paragraph to read, the board shall exercise its executive power by the appointment of a district superintendent, comma, who shall act as the chief administrator of the school district and shall be directly responsible to the board, period. He/she shall enforce the statutes of a commonwealth, the regulations of the State Board of Education, the policies of the board, and all other applicable laws and regulations. Okay. It's been, motion's made and seconded. All in favor? Yes.
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 All opposed? Motion passes. Okay, thank you. Now, let's move on to your second so I can capture that and make sure everybody understands it.
Sure. The second, I'd like to make a motion to add a sentence on to the second paragraph at the end, and that sentence would read, The board reserves the right to review, alter, or rescind any and all administrative regulations that the superintendent is required to promulgate pursuant to the requirements of any policy adopted by the board, period. So everything stays yeah.
Can you read that again?
So, yeah, so everything stays the same in that paragraph, except we're adding on at the end another sentence. The board reserves the right to review, alter, or rescind any and all administrative regulations that the superintendent is required to promulgate pursuant to the requirements of any policy adopted by the board, period.
Yeah, I'm not that quick in my.
Okay?
I need the last part again.
Okay, I will read one more time, slowly. The board reserves the right to review, alter, or rescind any and all administrative regulations that the superintendent is required to promulgate pursuant to the requirements of any policy adopted by the board. So it's essentially the first sentence in that third paragraph with the addition of alter or rescind. So we're moving that sentence up to the end of the second paragraph.
Okay. That makes it easier for me. Hang on a second. Let me just read this in my mind.
Okay, so we're just adding alter or rescind. So that So the board reserves the right to review, alter or rescind. And then.
Where does that sentence end?
It ends adopted by the board.
Or period?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're moving that first sentence from paragraph 3 to the end of paragraph 2, and we're adding review, alter, or rescind.
Yes, that makes it easier.
That's the only change.
Okay, so you made a motion. Did we have a second on that?
No.
I'll second.
Okay. Okay, we have a motion second. Let's discussion on this. Anybody?
I just have a question. So, as we currently don't vote on ARs now, would they, and that was, if this is how this is going to be done, if we were going to, reserve or, whatever, would that need to go like 3, like, would it go like a policy? Like, it would need to do 3 reads? Would it just be a yes, no? Like, what would our procedure be for that? That's kind of what I'm thinking. If we wanted to change, review, or rescind an AR, how would we do that?
So your present policy, I don't know which one it is.
It's this one. It says it later in that paragraph,
Okay.
bottom of
Yeah,
page
I mean,
1.
right now, it speaks to the adoption and amendments of policies. So I would not, absent another amendment, extend that same procedure to altering or rescinding an AR.
Other comments?
Yeah, just the, later in that, it's not part of the change, but later it just says, the board shall not adopt ARs unless required by law or requested by the superintendent. So that language is still in there. I just want to clarify, if the board wants to, alter or rescind a AR, it would do so at a public meeting? Yeah.
Yes, I would agree with that.
Yep.
Oh, Christina, I have a question on, so if we're ending, or we're moving the first part of paragraph 3 up to paragraph 2, are you getting to the rest of the paragraph? Is that your next motion? Okay, good.
Just a question to review and alter. So then if we were to want to do that, it would just be part of, like, would that mean that then it would be redone and then sent back to us if we rescind one?
It's whatever you.
Again, taking Dr. Miller's comment, if the board wanted to alter or rescind an administrative regulation, you have the authority to do that, and that would have to be done by a vote at a public meeting. So I'm not sure, did I answer your question, Ashley, or?
I'm just trying to think of a example in my head of how it would play out. Because right now, most of our ARs are public. And I would
I don't.
is this something we can do anyways, even if it's not Like, I don't know of
I
an
mean,
example of when it would be.
I'm just adding in language that we're already allowed to do, we have the authority to do, right, Mr. Hoffman?
The board has the ultimate authority.
Yeah,
Yes,
so
if
we
you wanted
have the
to
authority already by state law to alter or rescind. We are just putting it into the policy, not just to review it, but we also are saying we can alter and rescind, which is in alignment with state law.
Okay. And so would it take a majority of us to, I'm just trying to think, so it would come to an agenda, it
Correct.
would be brought up as to the why and the
A
how.
motion we've made, seconded, discussion,
Okay.
and then vote, ultimately vote. So the same process would still go through, just as we
And that
always
could
do.
currently happen right now.
Yep.
Correct.
Yep.
ARs in the past on occasion, as a board, maybe not this particular board, but the school board of Pine-Richland has voted on ARs, and that has been at a public meeting.
Okay.
Do you remember which one that was?
I do remember specifically the lawsuit when we passed,
Oh.
meaning
Your
not my
AR103B.
board, but in 2017, and I feel like another AR was brought before the board recently,
So I think that.
and I can't remember which
I don't,
one.
I don't know about that. I mean, generally, that's not been the practice. I think I'd have to look at, that was July of 2017, I think, was that particular item.
Yes.
Maybe July 17th, 2017,
Something like
something
that.
like that. And there might have been something in the language of that public content. I haven't looked at it in a while, so we could go back and look at that. I was trying to think of an example of this. You know, we have a textbook policy, for example. We have a textbook adoption AR. The AR goes into more detail about what processes or procedures. So if the board wanted to change something with textbook adoption, then the language you're proposing would allow the board to alter or rescind I'm using that example of textbook adoption, to change the language of the AR, if that's what you're, like that kind of example.
Yeah, or if we passed a policy, and this is just in theory, that conflicts with an AR, then we could rescind that AR.
I guess I would assume if we passed a policy, then the admin would work as they have normally in order to,
Correct. The policy
would-
would go first, the AR would come second. So if the policy changes, the AR would change.
okay. Sorry,
So-
I'm just trying to figure out context of how it would be applied in like
Sure.
an actual situation.
Yeah, and in that example that Dr. Miller just stated, we wouldn't rescind, we would alter. We would alter the AR.
Not we,
because-
it would be them, correct? We wouldn't necessarily alter it.
But we would direct them to alter it.
I guess my understanding is if we change a policy, that would already be assumed that they're going to have to alter it. So I don't know if this language change is necessary.
We
That's
could
all.
also have a policy we don't change, but direct the administration, for whatever reason, to alter an AR for whatever reason. I mean, I feel like that could happen too. So, I mean, I think there
Well,
could
Ashley-
be,
oh,
go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay, so the ARs are used to, explain how they're implementing the policy. So if we have a question, maybe the intent of the policy, and we're looking at the AR and it's conflicting, then we can use this language then to address that AR. And ultimately, they can adjust the AR, but we're directing them to do so. I don't know if that helps.
I just want to make sure that, like, I want to understand, are we the ones that will be changing the ARs? Like, are we taking that over? Or are we just exercising something in writing that we can already do currently?
Reserves the right to. So we can, if it becomes applicable, but we don't necessarily always do that because it's the district that would do that. We just reserve the right. At some time, there may be an instance where, based upon some of the examples that were just shared, that may happen. That doesn't mean that every one is going to be changed.
And these are rights that we already have. We're just putting it alongside the right to review, the right to alter, the right to rescind. We still, by state law, have this right. We're not, this is not a new idea.
Okay, I just want to make sure that we're not inserting ourselves in a way that is in excess, that's all.
Yep. Don't see that. I mean, especially since we already have the ability to do that, we're codifying it. through policy. That's how I see it there, so that's good. Okay, good discussion. Anything else on this?
I mentioned to Mr. Moore, this is just for the whole board, this is senior night for wrestling
Mhm.
when we pick this date, so I'm going to step out in a few minutes for that, and then I'll be back.
Okay, very good. Thank you. All right, no further discussions on that. Let me go ahead and read this to make sure. We've made a motion, it's been seconded, and it's taking that third paragraph under executive and moving it up to the second paragraph at the end.
First sentence of the third paragraph, not the whole paragraph.
Right, did I not say that? Okay, the first, part of the first sentence, okay, so I will read what moves up to the second paragraph. The board reserves the right to review, alter, or rescind any and all administrative regulations that the superintendent is required to promulgate pursuant to the requirements of any policy adopted by the board, period. Get that right? Okay. All right. With that, we have a motion and seconded. All in favor? Yes.
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 All opposed?
No.
One no. Motion passes. Okay, thank you. All right, your next change.
The third one is the third paragraph, striking the first sentence, or first half of the first sentence, since we just moved that up.
It's no longer there, right?
Correct. And beginning that paragraph with the sentence, "The board reserves the right to direct revisions of such administrative regulations when it considers the regulations to be inconsistent with board policy or district practices," and everything else changes. I mean, stays the same, not changes.
3 sentences to that paragraph, which we can change.
Yes.
That last
Yeah.
sentence, okay.
Okay. Can you read that again for me? What does that, so that first, the new first
Yeah,
sentence?
so the new first sentence reads, "The board reserves the right to
Okay.
direct..."
Just a minute. The board reserves the right to direct,
"revisions of such administrative regulations when it considers the regulations to be inconsistent with
Yep,
board
gotta stop.
policy or district policy."
gotta stop. I got the board reserves
Or
the right
practices.
to direct
Revisions
revisions
of such ARs or administrative regulations. When it considers
Oh, when it so it's, you continue, when it considers the regulations to be inconsistent
inconsistent
with the
with-
board policy or district policies.
Practices, district
Practices.
practices, period.
All right, yeah, practices.
period there.
Yes.
And then everything else stays the same in that paragraph.
Okay, so all you really, okay, I got you. Okay. Let me see if I've got this correct then. Well, have you made the motion? You've made the motion, so
Yeah.
is there seconded? Who seconded it?
I'll second.
Okay. All right. Let me just read that before we have a discussion. The board reserves the right to direct revisions of such administrative regulations when it considers the regulations to be inconsistent with the board policy or district practices. Correct?
Mm-hmm. And
Okay.
everything else stays the
So it
same
was
in that
really
paragraph.
just that part. Yes. Okay.
And this
got it.
change is just to clean that up now that we've moved that.
Yep.
It doesn't change the substance
No,
of that paragraph.
Just starts the new sentence off. Okay, discussion on this one? Comments?
Mr. Hoffman, are you able to verify that it doesn't change any of the substance? It's just kind of,
The last change does not.
okay.
The motion on the table does not affect any substantive change.
Okay.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay, with that, we'll vote. Again, the sentence reads, "The board reserves the right to direct revisions of such administrative regulations when it considers the regulations to be inconsistent with board policy or district practices, period." That becomes the new first sentence for the third paragraph in executive. All the following two sentences stay as is. All in favor?
Yes.
Yes.
All opposed? Motion passes. Okay, next change.
Okay.
This was your fourth and final one?
Right.
Okay.
Sorry. I'd like to make a motion to strike the last paragraph, the paragraph under the section Evaluation of Board Procedures, and replace it with, the board may plan an evaluation of its functions as a board, period. The board may evaluate procedures, comma, relationships, comma, or activities, comma, or focus on a particular area or issue, period. The board president or his or her designee, comma, working with the superintendent and in consultation with the remaining school directors, comma, may develop the plan to evaluate its functions as a board, period.
You're switching the sentences almost and adding some words.
A little
To
bit,
it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Like turning it around.
Yeah.
Do you mind one more time, please?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll read it slowly. So strike the whole paragraph and replace it with, the board may plan an evaluation of its functions as a board, period. The board may evaluate procedures, comma, relationships, comma, or activities, comma, or focus on a particular area or issue, period. The board president or his or her designee, comma, working with the superintendent and in consultation with the remaining school directors, comma, may develop the plan to evaluate its functions as a board. Yeah.
Change the shall to may.
Correct.
Okay. All right, so that's your motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, motion is seconded. All right, discussion on that change?
I don't like switching the shall to may. I think it's I think it's good of a board or any organization to take an annual look at itself and do an evaluation. So I think I don't have a problem with any of the other really changes in here, but I do think as a board, we should commit ourselves to once a year taking an evaluation and not leaving it as a shall, not leaving it as may, that we shall do it. It's not, that's the part that I have, the only part that I have concern with.
I don't think there's a requirement that we have to do the board self-evaluation.
There's no legal requirement, no.
So it doesn't mean that changing it from may to shall, that's the decision of the board together, whether we do that every year, how we approach it every year, or, is it once every biennium? Or it's up to
Right.
us to decide.
That's
So
why
if the
I
board
think
so
we should still
wishes-
do it once a year. So I think we should leave it as shall, so we do still have this in what we do once a year.
I think it just leaves it open to us to decide how frequently we want to do it, since there's no state requirement to do it annually.
Well, I feel like if it doesn't have, I don't want to let other people talk, but I feel like if we don't have it in here as a shall, then it won't get done, or it won't get done as often as it should. And I don't think it's that much work to do it once a year. So I don't think it's not a terrible amount of work. That's my thought.
Okay, what about the other parts of any comments on the other ways how it's been readjusted, shift from second to first?
I do not. That's the only part I have the problem
Okay.
with is the shall
Okay.
to may.
So we don't have any legal requirement, you're saying, to do that?
It seems more like a best practice, sort of. Like if we're going to hold ourselves, essentially we're holding ourselves to a standard. And how I understand it, what Amy is saying is we should hold ourselves to that standard of having it annually.
Yeah.
Just because if we're held to it by a policy versus just us on our own determining that we're going to do that, it may not happen. That's all.
Can I make a motion to amend Mrs. Brsalis's motion?
So
So
can I
to
ask-
change that,
Do we need to vote on the motion to amend before?
yeah. So
Do I
would-
need to agree to the amendment,
Yeah.
since it's my motion? Okay.
So my motion would be to keep that, it doesn't matter to me, the order of the sentences or any of the other thing, but the shall, the may, I'd like to leave it as shall, and I'd like to leave the word annual in there. That would be my motion to amend Mrs. Brsalis's amendment. If that makes sense. Is that all right, Mrs. Williams?
Motion to amend to keep may.
And then
should be
leave the word
shall.
annual in there. Yeah, leave shall instead of may, and leave annual.
And leave it annually. Okay. You have a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Now, do you want to read your statement in total?
I just kind of made notes with her, so I'll probably
Yeah.
mess how she had it out. I know she had the board. I don't have all the words because I didn't put the important ones in. So if Mrs. Williams, if you want to.
I can give it a shot.
Okay.
The board may plan an evaluation of its functions as a board. The board may evaluate procedures, relationships, or you wanted to say the board shall.
No, it can stay, that whole part can stay may. It's just the.
It's just the-
second sentence,
okay.
I guess, where it has developed.
The board shall evaluate procedures, relationships, or activities, or focus on a particular area or issue.
The board may at that.
one
That's the
stays at
may.
may.
That's
Okay,
the may.
sorry.
Yeah. That's okay. That's okay.
The
We'll-
board president or his/her designee, working with the superintendent and in consultation with the remaining school directors, will develop,
Shall.
shall develop the plan to evaluate its
Plan.
function by the board.
Shall develop an annual plan.
Okay.
Yeah, so just in the
Yep.
second sentence of Mrs. Brsalis's motion.
Shall develop the plan to evaluate its function of the board annually,
Yes.
is what you want. Okay.
Okay. Do we get that right?
So which mays are you replacing?
Just the
Just
one.
may develop an annual plan to evaluate its
Plan to
function as a board.
evaluate.
That's the third one.
Well,
That-
yeah, I guess the last one, I guess, I don't know, because I didn't write all the words down. So it said, so the last part of that would say, shall develop an annual plan to evaluate its functions as a board.
Well, then, sounds to me like you would want to change the first may to shall.
I mean, that would be fine. I feel like the other may, like I said, I don't have this all in front of me, so it's a little difficult. So, the other one, to me, it's fine if we kind of pick and choose what we evaluate, as long as we do some type of annual evaluation. So if we decide we're going to evaluate procedures, relationships, activities, that to me is okay.
Yeah, but the first sentence says the
Yeah.
currently it reads the board may plan an evaluation of its functions. The way you have it, it's conflicting language.
Yeah.
So it's either we shall evaluate or we may. I think you can't. I think the second one can stay because we could probably choose which ones from your perspective, but I think the first and last, if I understand your intent.
Got
Do
it.
you have that?
Mhm.
You got that?
That's okay, no
Okay.
worries.
Any further discussion on that? Okay. All in favor of that amendment to simplify it, to use shall at the first sentence and the last sentence?
And annual.
And annual.
Yes.
All in favor of that?
Yes.
Yes.
That's 4.
You got 4? Okay. All not in favor?
No.
No.
That's 4. Fails.
So
4,
how's it?
4.
what I got.
Fails.
4-4?
So it fails.
That fails.
Yes.
4-4?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So that goes back to the First Amendment. And Mrs. Brusaus, for the sake of clarity, would you read your statement? Because I do not have it captured.
The board may, the board may plan an evaluation of its functions as a board. The board may evaluate procedures, relationships, or activities, or focus on a particular area or issue. The board president or his or her designee, working with the superintendent and in consultation with the remaining school directors, may develop the plan to evaluate its functions as a board.
Okay. All right, thank you. It's been voted on, it's been seconded, and we've had a discussion. All in favor? Yes.
Yes.
All opposed?
No.
No.
you have a
3
count?
no's I got there and 5 yeses.
Okay.
Mrs. Miller, were you a yes?
The 2 folks online.
we didn't hear, I don't think Leslie responded.
Yes, sorry, I forgot to turn my microphone on, yes.
Okay, 5-3.
Okay, so do you have it? Do you have it?
Mhm.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. All right, what's the next change? Is there any more changes to 003?
I don't have any more unless
Does
someone
anyone
else
else
does.
have any suggested changes to 003? Okay, we will move on from 003. The next one is 004 membership. Mrs. Turchek, you had pulled that one?
Yes. So
Okay.
I would like to just, if I can, either we can skip it and come back to it, because I have some of the other things on here would apply depending on some changes. So can we put it back and reserve the right to pull it again, if that makes sense?
You want to move it back on the agenda? to-
Well,
or
just because like there's some things in like some of the other
like an
policies here that I feel like once we get that sorted out, I'd
then
like
you
to
wanna
come back to
and
this one,
revisit
if that's
this one.
okay?
Right, so you want to just move this to the
Yeah,
back of the
just
stack?
put it to the back of the pile, if that's,
Back of
if
the
that is,
stack.
yeah, that'd be fine. Thank you, I appreciate it.
That's fine. We can certainly do that. The next one is 006 meetings. Mrs. Hillman, you have a suggested change for that one?
Yes, I am looking at, for me, it's page 2. It's agenda preparation. Right now, there's one sentence under agenda preparation. We had some questions about this a couple months ago, and
Wait,
I
can
know
I
that-
just, wait, I just want to, were we going to do 005? Did we pull that one too? Were we going in order?
That one came up last. It was the
Okay, that's fine. I just
PSBA
wanted to make sure
changes, and
that-
so I kind of pushed,
Okay,
it was
not a
last, so
problem.
I added to the end of my list.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
No, I just wanted to make sure that, because I got 8,000 papers here. Okay.
Yeah. I hear you. Okay, carry
Okay.
on.
Agenda preparation, this is on page 2 of 006. And we had some questions as a board a couple months ago, and I think we had council weigh in and advise us on how to interpret that. So I'm suggesting just one additional sentence at the end of the sentence we currently have there, just to clarify the role that the board president has in setting the agenda. So I'd like to make a motion, keep the first sentence the same, so as it reads. The new sentence would read, "The board president has the final authority to determine the content of the agenda, period."
Second.
The board president has the final authority to,
To determine the content of the agenda, period.
Okay, I have
It
that
was
there.
seconded.
All right, motion's been made and seconded. Discussion. The point I'll make is that, based on council's discussion with us on this, it was pretty clear to me, how the agenda is being set and so forth. If you want to add a statement for clarity, that's fine. You can certainly do that. I don't necessarily think it's necessary, but that's fine if you want to put there. So open up for other
do.
comments made.
Well, I do have a big problem with this because as this came up earlier this year when I was trying to put things on the agenda and the board president shot those down. So I feel this limits other members of the board when they want to have something added to the agenda. So previously, when we had met, when we had a different president, we met and we basically accepted any agenda items that a board member wanted to put on the agenda. So I feel like that should be somewhere in here as well, but I just don't think it's in the good spirit to work together if we have one person that can kill people's agenda items.
So the current language actually doesn't address what you just mentioned.
Well, I wanted to change
Yeah, I
that,
know.
yes, correct.
But we can't, so if you want to add an agenda item, you can do that in a regular meeting, request that an agenda item be
Well, I
added.
think we had to vote on it and get it
Yeah.
on the amendment, but
Yeah.
that's not the same thing as previously, we would send an email to the board president and say like, hey, I think that I'd like to add this agenda item, can we put it February's agenda or something and have it? And now we don't have that because the president this now says president has final authority. I mean, he has taken final authority prior to this. So that's what I don't think is good for the rest of the people on the board.
So if you suggest that during a meeting and we vote on it, you're saying that
Well, then I don't get my, if I say, I would like to put blah, blah, blah on the agenda for the February 24th meeting or whatever it is, and we have to vote on it, And people say, no, I'm not getting my agenda item. The public isn't hearing it. We're not having the conversation. It's stifled before it gets on there. So like I said previously, like I remember Mr. Cassidy way back when, he said he wanted to put, maybe it was masking, I don't know what it was, that he wanted to put on the agenda, and he sent it, we put it on the agenda. It was a discussion item. Then we have a discussion about it, and we decide if we think there's feasibility or it's going to go forward, and it could be an action item. And if it's not, then it won't go. But I still think it merits
Yeah.
it to be a discussion item.
Okay, so Mr. Hoffman, I based that language off of the feedback that we received when we were asking for clarity on the agenda item. I don't know if you can weigh in on that.
Yeah, I mean, we had the issue in October where there was disagreement as to the agenda. And, we discussed then that ultimately it's the board's agenda and that the board president could make the final call based on the current language. To Mrs. Churchick's point, if you want to reflect the practice of allowing board members, individual board members, to request things to be placed on the agenda, if it's not on the agenda now, as we experienced, you'd have to make a motion to do so. If you want to change your policy, however, to allow individual members to request and have items added, it would be, in my recommendation, would be that you would add that to this policy.
Yep. Yeah, if you want to codify the fact that you want to add something to the agenda, I think you can codify that if you want. But the agenda preparation, ultimately, the way it's written before and your amendment coming to this is that the final authority will then rest with the president, to do that. That's how I read that. So let's work on this change here. If you want to make this amendment, like I said, I don't think it's necessary, but it's clarifying further.
Yeah.
That's what's already there. We can make the adjustment. Then if somebody wants to make an adjustment to that, we can
Okay.
certainly do that.
Okay. So I'm leaving my motion as it stands.
Okay.
Wait.
So I have a question. Go ahead. I already spoke, so go ahead if you have something you want to ask. I have a question
No,
for
I
Mr.
was
Hoffman.
just, I'm with Amy in the sense of, for transparency, so we're not kind of self-censoring in the sense of, if someone, because the way I'm reading Mr. Hoffman's response is that we ultimately govern majority rules, so if agenda items are added, we could always table them or decide to not discuss it. Is that correct? So an item could be on the agenda, and then majority of the board could essentially move it in public to not be there anymore.
That's correct. And I guess, again, just to go back to what's on the table versus Mrs. Churchick's comment, to me, if you're going to allow individual members to have things added to an agenda, then adding the statement that the board president would have the final authority would be inconsistent with that. So I think you're looking at two different concepts here in terms of what you want in your policy. So if you want, if the idea is that individual members can have things added to the agenda without the necessity of having a vote at a meeting, then you should vote against the current proposed amendment.
Okay, I don't know what the appetite is to one doing what Amy is preferring and then having this in there. And what I would like to see, if it ultimately is going to go to the ultimate authority, goes to the president, that there's some sort of notification of other board members. In October, we weren't really told why or how, so more transparency within that. If we don't have the appetite to be transparent in totality, if there could be some transparency codified, so we at least as board members are aware that something was raised and then decided against. That way, we're not having to undermine each other in public.
Okay, so according to policy, as it stands right now, responsibility of the superintendent in cooperation with the board secretary and the board president. That's where the agenda gets set, right? Comes from the superintendent, the board secretary, the board president. There is a leadership team meeting that we go through and we discuss, but the voting member is the board president between the superintendent and the board secretary. Now, to clarify that, to make it more clear, we say the board president has final authority to determine content, because that's the way it's written here. And so the amendment is being changed to make it more clear on how this is, and so we can take a vote on this and see how this works.
Do you think it would be better to fold in the leadership, so then there's more than one person that carries that, since there's 3 people in leadership, that it could be determined by a majority of the leadership, and therefore that would...
You can make that amendment. We can
Yeah.
vote on that, but that would be a separate amendment.
Right, I understand that. I'm just wondering if there's...
You have to make the amendment, so we vote on it. If you're
So I'd like
asking
to
for
amend the
support-
motion to, instead of saying the board president has the final authority, blah, 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 board leadership has the final authority to determine the content of the agenda?
Okay, so we have a second, motion made to add the Amy, I'd ask you to read
Yes,
that.
so with
Add
that-
this sentence.
It's just amending Lisa's motion. So instead of saying the board president has the final authority to determine blah, 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 it would say board leadership has the final authority to determine the content of the agenda.
And should we define the leadership, or is that
Yes.
implied?
So we
Okay.
should, board leadership, comma, defined as president, vice president, and treasurer.
Okay.
Okay. All right, we have a second.
Yeah, Joe seconded.
Okay. Any discussion on that change? No discussion, so we will go for a vote on that. Mrs. Turch, I ask that you repeat that once
Sure.
more time to be clear, and then I'll ask for a vote off of that statement.
Board leadership, comma, which includes the president, vice president, and treasurer, comma, has the final authority to determine the content of the agenda.
Okay,
Just,
go right ahead.
yeah, I want to further amend that, just so that it is by a majority vote of board leadership.
Okay.
So that it's not any one person of leadership, but the majority vote, so it's 2 of the 3, president, vice president, and treasurer, have to agree to put it on the agenda.
Okay, so, go ahead and say how you want to, just say board leadership by.
Board leadership by a majority, the board leadership defined as president, vice president, and treasurer, by a majority vote, has the final authority to determine the content of the agenda.
So would that be another amendment?
Mrs. Williams, you have that?
Mhm.
You're good?
Do we have an amendment of an amendment of amendment?
I think so.
That's what it sounds like.
Yep.
I just want to make sure we're clear if
You
we're
need a
going there.
second.
Amy, are you
Oh,
comfortable?
yeah, I'll
with that
second it. Yeah, that's fine.
Your
Yeah.
motion incorporating,
That's fine. I'll withdraw my motion, and I'll second Mike's if nobody else has.
Okay, any other comments?
Can we read it one more time, just so there's clarity,
Yes?
please?
Sure.
Board leadership defined as president, vice president, treasurer, by a majority vote, has the final authority to determine the content of the agenda.
Ms. Williams, I'd like a roll call vote.
Okay? One second, there we go.
Sure.
Ready?
Yep.
Okay. Mr. Cassidy?
Yes.
Mrs. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Morset?
No.
Mrs. Turchick?
Yes.
Mrs. Brusalis?
No.
Mr. Wheathorn?
Yes.
Mrs. Fortier?
Yes.
Mrs. Hillman?
No.
That is 5-3.
That was no, sorry. My
Okay.
microphone wasn't on.
I heard you.
Okay.
Motion
All right,
passes.
motion passes. Okay, other comments for 006?
So now we have to vote on the amendment of the amendment.
The
Or the
amendment?
main motion, or do we have to vote on the second, or?
She withdrew the second.
I withdrew mine.
Oh, you withdrew it, okay.
Yeah, so we're just voting on,
Okay.
so we have to revote, just vote again.
amended motion. Basically, it'd be the same substance. The board leadership defined as the president, vice president, treasurer by majority vote, has the final authority to determine the content of the agenda.
Okay, so the first time we just took this roll call vote, it was on to make the amendment. Okay, so now the amendment is made, so now we have a final statement, and now we vote on if we want this to reflect in the policy. Okay, gotcha. Okay. And Mrs. Williams, would you mind reading that again? And then
Read it?
once you read it, then we'll do a roll call, because this is what will go into the policy.
Okay. Motion to amend the amended, oh wait, I'm sorry, we got it. Never mind.
It's
The
okay.
the board leadership defined as president, vice president, treasurer by a majority vote has the final authority to determine the content of the agenda. Ready?
I'm sorry, Barb, one more time.
Oh, yeah. The board leadership, defined as president, vice president, treasurer, by a majority vote, has the final authority to determine the content of the agenda.
Okay.
Roll call?
And do roll call, please, yes.
Mr. Morset?
No.
Mrs. Brusalis?
No.
Mr. Cassidy?
Yes.
Mrs. Turchick?
Yes.
Mr. Wheathorn?
Yes.
Mrs. Fortier?
Yes.
Mrs. Miller?
Yes.
Mrs. Hillman?
No.
Okay.
Same,
Mo- Yep.
5-3.
Got it, okay. Other changes to the policy?
I have a motion, I have an amendment to make at the end of that same paragraph. Do I have this on? I probably have to work on the wording of this because we changed things in this previous agenda, but all agenda requests by board members are to be discussed at board leadership meetings.
All agenda items.
All agenda requests, all board member agenda requests are to be discussed at board leadership meeting.
So are you, I'm sorry, we
I
need a
don't- I
I
second.
want to make sure she's got it there,
Yeah.
because I want to make sure that this,
All board member requests, all board member agenda
Agenda
requests
requests.
are to be discussed at a board leadership meeting.
Yeah, or the board leadership
the-
meeting.
Okay.
Yeah.
We
okay?
just need a second.
Second.
Okay.
So are you proposing that we not have the right to bring up items for the agenda in public meetings? with this
No,
amendment?
that's everybody's right as well. But what I'm saying is that if I had an agenda request and I send it to the three board leadership, that would be discussed at the board leadership meeting. It could
Well,
change to voted as well.
And it
voted
also
upon
sounds
already.
redundant because you just said that you have to have everyone agree to it. So it sounds intuitively that you will be discussing all agenda items and agreeing to the agenda together. So this
I
is a
mean, but I just want to make sure.
redundant
Well, I just want to
amendment.
make sure that it gets discussed.
Well, if you send an email to the board leadership, all three individuals, I mean, it just seems excessive.
I think it just, like other amendments we've made that have been implied, it's just another way of letting members know that their voices is going to be heard. It just kind of puts that in there.
Other comments?
Isn't it just codifying what you already do, Phil?
I believe so.
All right, then I think it should be in the policy. If what we're doing is codifying it.
Okay. Thank you. Other comments?
Is there a second?
Yes, Mr. Cassidy.
Joe seconded.
Mr. Cassidy did, yeah. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and we'll give it a vote.
Do you want to do a roll call?
It's up, do you want a roll call?
We can do a roll call. That'd be fine.
Okay.
Okay, you want me to reread it? Motion would be, motion to amend by adding at the end of that paragraph, all board member requests, agenda requests, I don't know why I'm missing that. All board member agenda requests are to be discussed at the board leadership meeting.
Mhm.
Okay, ready?
Yep.
Mrs. Turchick?
Yes.
Mr. Wheathorn?
No.
Mr. Morset?
Yes.
Mrs. Miller?
Yes.
Mrs. Hillman?
Yes.
Mrs. Brusalis?
No.
Mr. Cassidy?
Yes.
Mrs. Fortier?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, other changes for this item 006?
So I have a couple. One is a very small one, and I don't even know if we need to vote on it. In service should be hyphenated. We hyphenate it in some instances, or at least one instance, and not in others. If we could just clean that up.
I don't think you need to vote on that.
Yeah. So then the other, I have two changes actually. So under agenda notifications, I'd like to amend the first sentence to read, "The agenda, comma, together with all relevant reports and supporting materials, comma, shall be provided to each school director at least 3 business days before the meeting." So I'm adding in "and supporting materials."
Second.
Can you give an example of what that would be?
Contracts, sometimes we've not seen contracts until the day of a vote. That, some contracts are very complicated and lengthy and doesn't really give us time to read it and review it. So that would be one example.
Okay.
And that's happened more than once during my tenure.
I'd say the most common example usually comes from facilities. There might be something in facilities where there's underlines or there's, in the agenda and it doesn't have the attachments until later.
Would that impact our ability to take action then? Like, what would the impact be? That
would-
change?
The impact is our ability as elected
To make a
officials
decision.
entrusted to make good decisions on behalf of our community, to have time to review all the contracts.
Well, I
No,
think
And-
no, I just mean in general.
we'd have to pull the agenda item. We're just, what would happen?
Is that what that would mean?
If we didn't have it in time,
Yeah. I'm just trying to think of
Yeah.
implementation, what the actual impact it would have. You're saying for.
I'm saying, I mean, I would suggest it could stay on the agenda, but not as an action item. If this language is included, nothing wrong with keeping it there for information discussion, but it might not be acted upon at that particular meeting.
So do you feel like it would be beneficial to have that language in our policy, that it would turn from action to, or that's implied?
I mean, we work very hard with all of the senior leaders who submit items to get them there. We are so good, that's all I'll say, at getting things there early, as complete as they can be. When we haven't, it's because we're trying to either negotiate, whatever it is at the last, as we get closer to a meeting. Potentially, the impact of this language would be, instead of something coming for action, if we can't meet the language, it would stay as an information item for one more meeting and then become action at the subsequent meeting. So could that be problematic? Maybe. I think it's limiting. I think using discretion and judgment makes sense. Not everything is of equal complexity as the example of a contract. So I don't like anything that interferes with our ability to, operate in reasonable, efficient ways.
As to that last point, and I agree with what Dr. Miller just said, there's no reason to put a limiting criterion in your policy. If you're at a board meeting, there may be a situation where, either through negotiation or there's some other emergent circumstance that necessitates you taking action. If there's an item on the agenda that you don't feel you have the sufficient information to support, you always have the option of tabling that.
so how does this affect that we already have the requirement of reports? What's defined as reports? Because we already have it in the policy.
As I said, I don't know. I feel really good about the agendas we develop. Very rarely do we have concerns. I mean, there may be times when certain things are coming, towards the end, but even then, it's I would say rare that after a Friday we're adding much. And that's the 3 days prior to the board meeting.
It's
So I
3
think we've
business
been
days,
pretty
too,
good about
right?
having all of that there.
I would agree. The only time I would see this be an issue is with facilities, with quotes and things. Trying to get 3 quotes from vendors can be difficult, and I would say it could pose a problem for that. And a lot of times, the contracts and things like that are definitely, as we indicate many times, reviewed by school solicitors too, so.
Like
How
to-
would, go ahead.
I was going to say, like tonight, a couple of these policies were late pulls. I don't think that's an issue. I mean, this is not a voting meeting, like yeah, right, I think all of the things that exist in policy, the zeros, are designed to make transparent the governance, but to do so in a way that makes sense for the board. To be helpful to guiding the board. They're established in routines and procedures, and I think we're pretty good at it, so.
Okay, well, how would this apply to like personnel and supplementals? Because a lot of times we don't get those until like Monday morning, so then that would be,
Usually, so for example, I don't know. I mean, that's a question for Mr. Hoffman or for the person. So like typically, we'll have most of a personnel,
Yeah.
but maybe there's a job offer that went out for Mr. Glickman, and we've not heard yet back from the candidate. If we hear back from the candidate, generally, we add that person because we want to get them approved. Otherwise, we'd be waiting until, 2 weeks or depending on whatever it is.
And
So-
he usually makes a statement that he says, we want to
Correct.
get the
We
approval because
anticipate.
I'm expecting something coming. And so he makes that statement to us.
So can I ask a question? At our last meeting, Mr. Hoffman, we were talking about the policy and when the policy needed to be up for the public for awareness, because that's one of the questions I had regarding this. What materials, if any, do we need to post 24 hours before?
Sunshine Law requires that you're posting the agenda.
Just the
24 hours
agenda?
ahead of
Okay.
time. For, if you're going to have a policy for discussion, to me, transparency, you'd have that policy posted as public content. Are you required to by Sunshine Law? No. Sunshine Law just says you've got to
So-
notify the public, these are the topics of discussion. or
So would the
action.
same thing hold true for any other material that we're voting on?
You have the discretion as to what you include or don't include as public content. The principle holds true, to answer your question.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Christina, but I mean, again, it's common to have on as your public content, some contracts and things of that sort. So that's up to the board as to how you want to do that. But again, Sunshine Law just says you've got to provide notice of what it is that you're discussing or taking action on.
So if I'm understanding this conversation correctly, as long as it's on the agenda, we don't necessarily have to have the reports or the supporting materials to the public. We just can't change that general outline.
Correct. With
So
very
that wouldn't
few exceptions.
impact the whole sunshine. So the flexibility's there for example, personnel and things of that nature.
Correct, I agree.
Okay.
well, I mean, I'll say I'm comfortable the way the language is. I don't think this comes up a lot. It does, you are correct, it does come up sometimes that we don't get, information till close, the day of the meeting or right before. And I don't want to limit us in case it's something. I do think we can always use the option of tabling something if we don't feel comfortable, but I don't want to have this in our policy that it like ties our
Well-
hands, especially if we're in a construction project or something like that.
I mean, I'm willing to rescind my amendment if there's strong feeling that it's maybe,
What would that be?
I would just rescind my amendment and
Oh,
leave the
rescind.
language
I thought
the
you said
same
adjust. I'm
as
sorry.
it stands.
Okay.
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 So I do have I have one more question related to this. On the next same section, the agenda notification related to removal of an officer is 7 days. Is there a time period that we must provide? Is 7 days sufficient?
There is no hard and fast rule as to the number of days. Prior notice is required.
Is this just for officers then, right? It's not removal of a board member, right? It's just for the officers?
Well,
Okay.
the board doesn't have the power to remove the board member except for one situation.
Okay.
But this does pertain only to an officer.
To an officer, okay.
Yeah. Okay, that answers my question, so I have no change there. So the last change, I'd like to make a motion, and this is the public participation paragraph. I'd like to strike it, and the reason I'd like to strike it and replace it with this language is just to make it more general, and so it applies to all our meetings. We have our joint governance meetings where the public comment comes at the end, and and our regular board meetings where we have or public comment at the beginning and the end. I would like to make a motion to change this language, strike the whole paragraph, and change the language to members of the public may address the board at open board meetings in accordance with law and board procedures and policy. And considering that we already have a policy on public participation, I think that weighs in there so that there's just not confusion about before and afters.
Ah, yes.
Christina, can you read that again?
Yeah. So again, striking the paragraph and replacing with members of the public may address the board at open board meetings in accordance with law and board procedures and policy, period. So we're not changing our procedures, but we're just pointing back to the public participation policy that is in existence in the 900s.
So I just have a question. So is this meaning that for like a joint governance, we would have speakers before and after, or we would keep it? Okay,
No,
that's
no.
okay. That
It's
was
just
okay.
saying, and that's why I wanted to change.
Just have it
was
so it's the
that
same language, that's fine.
It talks
Okay.
about before in this clause, just to make it just a little less confusing and pointing back to our public policy or public participation policy in the 900s. It's just pointing to it. It's not changing it. It's just pointing to it instead of. I think it just makes it confusing.
You need a second.
I'll second.
Okay, discussion on that? Any questions?
Mr. Hoffman, does that change anything?
If I heard the amendment right, it would not. And again, you have, as Christina pointed out, Board Policy 903, I believe is the correct number, addresses public comment at meetings.
Just the word open feels odd. It's not something we use. I mean, publicly advertised or just board meetings and remove the word.
I can amend that to remove the word open.
At each board meeting.
I'm going to ask you to repeat that anyway,
So
after
I'm
discussion.
amending.
Okay.
What?
Yeah, you're amending. Okay.
I'll
Go ahead.
second.
Hoffman, do you have a comment?
Well, I agree with the comment that open's a little strange, but maybe
Only because we
public
have
meetings.
executive sessions.
Maybe public instead of open would be a
Okay.
better.
All right, so I'll amend my amendment to read, members of the public may address the board at public board meetings in accordance with law and board procedures and policy.
Yeah, so, not to split hairs, but amend Christina's amendment to members of the community at public meetings may address the board. So that we do not expand. Right now, it's limited to the community as to who can speak.
Wouldn't the policy that we're pointing to limit that?
Well, that's a good
Yeah.
point, does it?
Yeah, but still, it makes a point. We might as well, if we're saying the same thing, let's codify it. I agree with that.
Right. Presently, Policy 903 gives that opportunity to district residents, taxpayers, employees, and students. That's what you have in Policy 903.
Mr. Hoffman, if you're saying that if you're comfortable with the language pointing to the 903, then I'll withdraw. I just don't want to, I didn't want to expand it beyond what it is.
Would
I'm
it be worth
comfortable either way.
referencing 903?
You would. That's what these are.
Are we
Oh,
withdrawing?
got it,
Did
got
you
it,
withdraw yours?
got it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's there.
Yep. Okay, can you read what we have?
So, members of the public may address the board at public board meetings in accordance with law and board procedures and policies.
Okay.
Second.
We-
All right,
yeah.
any more discussion on
And
this?
this is the amendment to amend that we're
Yes.
voting on, just so everybody knows.
This is the amendment to amend, yes. Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Any other discussion on that? Okay, all in favor?
Yes.
Yes.
All opposed? So we have now amended the amendment. So let's read what the amendment is, and we'll vote it into policy.
Okay,
Or
sorry.
out of, or not in policy, depending on the vote.
All right.
Mem-
Do you have it?
Yep.
You want to read it?
Members of the public may address the board at public board meetings in accordance with law and board procedures and policy.
Okay? All in favor?
Yes.
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 All opposed? Motion passes. Other adjustments to 006. Okay, we're good. Let's move on to item 006.1, which was pulled by Mrs. Turchek. Amy, you have this one, your first statement for this?
Sure. Okay, so I'd like to make a motion that after the very first paragraph there, if a school board director is participating remotely, no changes in agenda or otherwise should be made.
Wait, Amy, this is you're making a new second paragraph?
Well, no, I'm just adding a sentence at the end of the first paragraph.
Okay.
Okay, can you repeat that again?
Sure.
Go slowly.
If a school board director is participating remotely, no changes in the agenda or otherwise should be made, period.
Whether someone's participating remotely, well, first of all, somebody second this?
Need a
Joe
second.
seconded it.
Okay, so whether somebody's participating remotely or in person, it should be the same. It's consistent.
I'm just putting it in because earlier this year, it was not the same, and there were changes made to the agenda to accommodate people who were participating remotely. So I would like to put in our agenda, or in our policy, that we continue with our school board business as we planned. We're not making accommodations because people are participating remotely.
Can you repeat that again, so I got it here?
If a school board director is participating remotely, no changes in the agenda or otherwise should be made.
Shall be. Okay, we have a motion. If a school board director is participating remotely, no changes in agenda shall be made. I got that correct?
Or-
Okay.
In the agenda or otherwise?
In the agenda or otherwise
Should be made.
Or
Or is it shall be made?
otherwise.
Shall be made.
Shall be made. Okay, got it. Okay, open for discussion.
Mr. Hoffman, do you see any, need for clarification in that statement?
I'm trying to understand its impact.
I am too.
Yeah.
The way I heard it was, the method of participation of a board member or members should not impact the agenda development or meeting operation. That's sort of what I heard.
Correct, yes.
And I find that as kind of limiting. I mean, there may be at some point, some circumstance, perhaps Dr. Miller is unable to be here and he has been integral in something that we have at the board, or someone has an accident and they are leading a major initiative of the school. I feel like that's limiting. I feel like that's up to board leadership, as we have, if the changes to the board, that's in the agenda making portion. This is about participation and agenda making is a different policy.
There is part in here further down about if there's an emergency or something like that pops up. But I am just referencing what happened earlier this year when certain things were not put on the agenda because people weren't in person. And I would like us to keep, the board business needs to continue to function, whether people are in person or not. And if people are going to have to participate virtually, I understand things happen, then the board business should continue. Things should not get pushed off until everybody can be in person.
Right, and to add to that, so it's even-handed when it is.
Correct, yes.
Because it was a consideration for some and not all. So I think that is important.
Yeah, I think when you have a participation like we do today, and we have a discussion, sometimes I'm on mute, I'm not, and sometimes we can miss some things. And so I understand that situation happens. And when you start to deal with very important, whether it's budgetary, major expenses, or any other type of very serious things, I think it's important that everybody does try to contribute and be involved and to be here. And sometimes you have on the outside where you're traveling or something, it's very difficult to hear and to understand and do something. So that does come into play. So I understand that that does come into play. All right, I'm just trying to understand this impact,
Can I just,
understand. Go ahead.
now that I
Can I
think
add
I,
something? I mean, I'm remote and I'm understanding perfectly fine.
Yeah, good, Joe. I'm glad you can. Sometimes you can and sometimes you can't, but I'm glad, thank you for that comment. Okay, Mr.
Go ahead,
Hoffman?
Mr. Hoffman.
yeah, I was just going to, can I try to restate what I think?
Yeah,
we're trying
please,
to
I'd be
do?
happy,
Just
and yes.
trying to get clearer language. The circumstance that one or more school directors participate in a meeting via video conference or telephone conference shall not result in modification of the agenda.
Yes, so I'd like to, if I can pull my, withdraw my motion and make that my motion, if Mr. Hoffman can repeat that.
Slowly.
I was just trying to capture the
Yes.
intent. The circumstance that one or more school directors participates in a meeting via video or telephone conference shall not result in the modification of the agenda.
Do I have a second on that motion that I?
Second.
Okay, thank you.
So I am looking at the policy, again, back to the limitations that might occur with this, is that if you look at 006, which we just discussed about, there are a number of circumstances where you need 2/3 of a vote. So depending on whether a person can or can't participate or is limited by circumstances, I think remote participation, depending on how well you can or can't hear, or if you're traveling during a time and can't fully participate, could impact some items on an agenda. And this is number 2 under voting and special voting requirements, where we require 2/3 votes. There's even circumstances, though I think they're probably very rare, where you need everyone
Well, my argument
voting
on,
in favor of something. So I do think that it could impact some things.
well, and I get that, but then if we're going to allow people to participate remotely, and then we say like that, well, we won't do that because they can't participate fully, then maybe we don't have remote participation, that you have to be here in person. Like, that would be the argument in that. If we're saying that, like, for example, Mr. Cassidy tonight, like, we can't hear him, so his vote doesn't count, or it doesn't, like, then he's not here. So if we're
Right,
going
so
to
you have-
allow someone to participate virtually, then we have to, like I said, continue with the board business. We can't pick and choose what we put on the agenda.
Right, but there are
because people aren't in person.
circumstances where you have to consider whether someone can be full participants or not.
If they're here, if they are participating virtually, they're a full participant. There's actually a
Yeah.
thing further down
There's guidelines.
on this same page where it says if there is a technological issue or somebody can't hear, then the board president can decide that,
They're not there.
That they're not there, so they would be.
Which could impact the ability of the board to do its business. So I
Correct.
do think
Yes.
there are circumstances
Yeah.
where you need to consider that someone might be traveling, trying to be a good board member and trying to participate, might be in an area where they can't get good signal in and out, and then they're not able to make, and where we require these 2/3 decisions, they're important votes. And I think intuitive in that 2/3 is because they're important votes, and you need to have more than just a majority weigh in on it. That's just my thought. I feel like it's very limiting, that's all.
All right,
But
so
that would-
we've made a change here previously on how an agenda is set, which is now by the board leadership. So with a majority vote, amended to majority vote there. So this whole sentence is pertaining to how an agenda is going to be set, basically participation. You've got that,
No, it's saying you can't change it because people cannot attend.
Yeah.
which is
Now,
basically how
if
the
you have-
agenda is.
If you have a
is set.
quorum
No,
issue.
if we have things scheduled that are supposed to come up and be voted
Right.
upon, and
Right.
and we had to say we have something in September that was a discussion item, and then October it's scheduled to be an information or an action item, and then turns out 2 people are on vacation, and then what I'm saying is we need to continue with the board business and
Business.
keep that item as an action item and not push it off to November or whatever, because
Right.
we've had problems in the past
And-
where we've picked and choose what got on the agenda depending on who
Why?
was there or who wasn't.
But board leadership has the ultimate say by majority vote of what goes on the agenda or does not go on the agenda. So
Well-
that's where the agenda is set at board
Correct, but if
leadership.
something is
It's not set by the authority of attendance at meetings. It's set at the board leadership. We just passed that.
Yes.
That's where the agenda's set.
Correct,
Okay.
yes. But
Does-
what I'm saying, if something is a discussion item in October, and then it's scheduled, like we have it, we discuss it, and we put it, it's going to be, I wouldn't think this would be something, as a person who used to be on board leadership, we didn't re-vote, it just moved to the next meeting as an action item, because we already discussed it. And what I'm saying is we're going to leave it as an action item. We're not going to kick it down the can because people are on vacation.
When you keep saying "we," we've still just given the authority to board leadership.
Yeah, board, that's
to
what I mean, board
decide the
leadership.
agenda.
Yes, correct.
I understand and I agree
Yes.
with what you're saying, Phil. So we've given that authority to board leadership. So the agenda is set depending on their decision. Whatever the decision is for the agenda, it's set.
Well, the board
So-
leadership doesn't decide if something was a discussion item in one month, and then the next month it's an
We
action.
Decide
we
if
actually
it's going
do.
on the
We
agenda.
we actually meet twice a month on board leadership
I know, I
before every
remember.
meeting and stuff, so that does happen. And
I'd
we
like to
talk
call
about
the
how that
question.
is. Okay, the question's been called.
Need a second.
Need a second?
Second.
Okay. All right.
Calling the question.
Right,
Yeah.
this is calling the question, and we want to do a roll call or just a vote?
Roll call.
Okay, roll call would be helpful.
Hang on one second.
This is to call the question. This is a roll call for calling the question for,
Okay. Mrs. Fortier?
Can we repeat what the,
This is just call the question.
Oh.
I'm sorry. This is to
Oh,
call the
okay.
question.
Mrs. Fortier?
no.
Mrs. Turchick?
Yes.
Mrs. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Wheathorn?
Yes.
Mrs. Brusalis?
Yes.
Mr. Morset?
yep,
Mr. Cassidy?
Yes.
Mrs. Mrs. Hillman?
Yes.
Motion passes.
okay. So, Mrs. Williams, can you read the amendment that's on the table at this time?
The circumstance that one or more school director participates in a meeting via video or telephone conference shall not result in the modification of the agenda.
Okay, thank you. Would you like a roll call?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, ready?
Yep,
Sorry, I'm crossing Mr. Kashani off so I don't say his name. Mrs. Brusalis?
No.
Mrs. Turchick?
Yes.
Mrs. Fortier?
Yes.
Mrs. Miller?
No.
Mr. Cassidy?
Yes.
Mr. Morset?
no?
Mrs. Hillman?
No.
Mr. Wheathorn?
No.
3, 5, motion fails.
Okay, other changes for 006.1?
Yep, I have another motion. So
Okay.
in the, under guidelines, in the, my glasses, where it says board president, it says if the board president determines either, this is about if people are having computer issues. The board president determines either condition is not occurring. The board president shall terminate the school director's attendance through electronic communications. Can we say, change both of those board president to majority of board present? Okay, I mean, the spirit of that would be
Yeah.
if, for example, like Joe, Mr. Cassidy, we couldn't hear him, we decide he's out, but we would vote, the people here would vote and decide if we, not just one person decides if,
Yeah.
he was having technology issues and had to be removed from the meeting, or whatever you want to call it.
Okay, so.
So I'm
so
changing the
yeah.
there's two board presidents there in that second sentence, and I would like both of those to change to majority of the board present.
If the, majority, if the majority, so see if I got this right. If the majority of the board determines either condition is not occurring, the majority of the board shall terminate the school director's attendance through electronic communications.
Yes.
No, I think you use the word majority of the board present.
The majority board present, yeah, the people who are here.
And you need a second.
And do you really need the majority of the board shall terminate? Because
Well, I'm
if-
just using the same language as what was there. Yeah,
Yeah.
so yeah, because they are going to determinate.
I mean, how do we terminate the school director's attendance through electronic communications?
We would just say, we can't
just
hear
cut 'em
you.
off?
We can't hear you, and then
No,
they
no,
would
no,
be.
that, I know
yeah.
why, but how? How we're saying we terminate the school director's attendance, does that
So
mean?
we say they're not here, like it's like they didn't attend.
Okay, so we don't cut them off.
Well, it would be, like, if you read the first part about if they, the school director can hear and said the meeting and all those attending can't hear so they're having technical issues, basically, is what the first part of that says.
Understand.
So we would say, like, we can't hear you, so essentially, we would terminate, like, they didn't attend the meeting because they were unable to participate virtually because of the.
Okay, and so
Tech
that's,
issues.
that's where I'm trying to understand is the word terminate, meaning we have Mr. Stobart cut him off, hang him up?
Well-
Or do we just ignore?
Okay, so the
No.
sentence, let me just read the whole paragraph, maybe it makes sense. School director who attends a meeting through electronic communication shall be considered present only if the school director can hear everything said at the meeting and all those attending the meeting can hear everything said by that school director and other participants addressing the board. So then, if the majority of the board determines that either condition is not occurring, meaning they can't hear us, we can't hear them,
Right.
the majority of the board shall terminate the school director's attendance through electronic communications, meaning we would shut them off, and that would be like they were not here, they didn't attend.
And again, that's where I'm going, is the word terminate. You just use shut them off, which is fine.
Okay,
And I
well,
just
I'm
wanna make
using the
su-
language that was here, I didn't
And I'm
want to change
fine with
too
all
much
that
stuff.
language. I'm just focusing on the word terminate. Because
Okay.
terminate means we ignore, he's still there, or we hang up the phone.
I would think it means hang up the phone.
Terminate means.
Thank
done.
you.
Or the connection,
Thank you.
yes.
That's what I was getting to, is that we cut off the communication or hang up the phone, or I forget what the word is, the proper word, but you disconnect.
Yeah.
You disconnect.
I'll second that.
So I guess I'm amending your amendment and to read, if the majority of the board present determines either condition is not occurring, the majority of the board shall disconnect the school director's attendance through electronic communications.
Okay. I'll second that.
But
So
I
just
think-
terminate.
I
we're
think
Wait,
she
that
already
was
did.
your,
Yeah,
He made a amendment to my amendment, so I was.
okay, you were making
yeah.
okay.
made an amendment to that.
So really just, you're changing terminate to disconnect.
Can I ask a practical question?
Yes.
So when that occurs, are we hanging up on this person on the, do we have the means of disconnecting somebody?
Yeah, it's really not occurred. When there's been trouble with somebody, they usually are a person that says, hey, I'm having trouble. They inform, whoever's online informs us that they're having difficulty, and they usually just drop out of the meeting.
Yeah. The change I want to make, if that's the case, I would like the decision to be made, if the board needs to make it, that it's made by the board and not just the president. That's
Do
the
I have a
real-
second for this amendment, for the
I
amendment?
think Christina did.
Christina.
Well,
Who-
the
who-
first one, and then
yeah.
I don't know which amendment we're on, but yes, I think we
Amy
got.
seconded Phil's.
I
Oh,
seconded
amendment.
Amy's.
Yep.
Okay.
And I'm going to just express that it's a big decision. Should we have to terminate someone's participation, that should be a board decision, because I'm just being, if I were on the call, I'd be mad if I was.
Yeah, right.
So
Because
I
maybe
just.
I'm in a
yes.
zone, I'm going through.
Yeah,
a
I
cell
just
zone.
think it's a big decision to
Yeah, I think it is a big
remove someone
decision.
from a board
Yeah,
meeting.
agree. And that's why I
And-
don't think it should just be one person. That's why
Yeah.
I wanted it to be the board made a decision.
This isn't what you're amending, but the sentence before that says that only if the school director can hear everything said at the meeting. I just think we need to be careful with that. I mean, I'm sitting in the meeting, and a lot of times I can't hear, we have, audience members yelling. And so I can't even hear, what's being said across the table. So I think we need to be careful, even when we're voting, how we're defining that. Because we've all been virtual, and sometimes we have issues hearing things here or there. And it may not be that we're not able to participate, we just need things repeated, or we didn't hear for other reasons, so.
Should we raise the bar to 2/3?
As a vote, as opposed to majority?
I mean, I think these instances are going to be pretty rare, like Dr. Miller said.
Yeah, I
Usually
think-
it's a matter of.
No,
Yeah.
yes, exactly. And I think,
It's already in there, so it kind of just.
Yeah, like I
creates
said.
more of a.
The closest we've gotten, I
Uniformity.
think, is someone calling in and sound like a party in the background, but we could still hear them.
I would say raising the bar doesn't hurt something like that. I mean, because it is a big decision to do something like that.
I would support.
I'd like to amend the amendment. Instead of majority, if we could replace that with 2/3.
Okay, so we're going to have to,
And then instead of majority for the second reference, Mrs. Williams, let's just put board there. I think that's intuitive.
Yeah.
2/3 of the board present determines either condition is not occurring, the board shall disconnect.
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, do we have this?
Okay, so if I can read this.
Yes, you may.
If 2/3 of the board present determines either condition is not occurring, the board shall disconnect the school director's attendance through electronic communications.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we're voting on the amendment change. Not, and not that it goes into the policy, this is just voting on the change.
And then another change, and then the amendment, right? We have 2 amendment changes, right? Don't we have 2 amendments to the amendment?
No.
Vote on the first amendment, then that can be on the floor.
That
Okay,
becomes on the
all right,
floor.
fine, that's fine.
Okay, thank goodness.
Trace your step.
Okay,
Thank goodness.
just making sure.
Okay, all right, so we have a second on that, Mrs. Williams? Yes?
We do.
Okay, any more discussion on this item? Okay, so let's vote. All in favor?
Yes.
All
Yes.
opposed? Thank you. All opposed? Okay, motion passes.
Now you can vote on the amended.
I think Mrs. Miller is off now, so
Did
I
we
just want.
terminate her?
everybody-
Yeah.
I want-
Disconnect her.
I just want to make sure everybody's aware of that. So, there's 7 yeses.
Okay. All right, let's go ahead and vote to put this as part of the policy. Do I need to read this? Everybody's clear?
2/3.
2/3, yes.
2/3.
Okay. All right, all in favor?
Yes.
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 All opposed? Okay, motion passes. It's in. All right, other changes for 006.1.
I think I had any other-
Okay, no other changes. Let's move on to 011, Principles of Governance and Leadership. Mrs. Tur, Amy,
Yep.
you were the first one to
Yep, I
pull,
just
so you
wanted- I
got
wanted to
first
fix something that
cut
I
at
wrote.
any
Okay.
change.
Yep. So policy 011, I would like to make an amendment and add a sentence after that very first little, I don't know, intro sentence there. This board policy supports the principles for governance and leadership adopted by the board and signed by individual school directors. Signature within 60 days. Do we sign that, like, is this of the new term? Is that how it's, I wasn't sure. That's why I wanted to ask Mrs. Williams, right? We sign it every year, correct?
Correct.
So like the new term starts when the board realigns,
It's
correct?
during reorg, yes.
Reorg, so
Mhm.
within 60 days of board reorganization. Failure to do so would cause a school director to be removed as any committee chairs or officers.
Second.
Okay, motion's been made and seconded. Any discussions?
Yeah, Mr. Hoffman, is there a legal obligation on any board member to sign this document?
No, there's no legal obligation.
Thank you.
But if we have it in our policy, we can, and it says, is required, we can make, I would say that this is board, we can make it required as part of our policies.
Well, you can't compel somebody to sign it, but.
Well, if they
your-
don't
your
sign it,
amendment to
yeah,
what
if
you're
we have
proposing
assignment, they can't
would
have, be a committee
consequence
chair, yes,
for
they can't
somebody
be a
not
committee
doing
chair
so.
or an officer. Okay,
So I don't, conceptually, I understand the motion, but.
Okay.
There's no legal.
there's no legal thing.
Requirement that anybody sign this.
Okay.
So I'm going to address the reason I don't sign it. Not that, I mean, I think it's a feel-good policy, but that doesn't make it a good policy. And there are a number of issues in this policy that I feel potentially infringes on all of our First Amendment rights. It preemptively asks a board member to sign away their right to disagree. And I'm not willing to do that. I mean, we give a lot of lip service to the decide model, but if you don't agree with something, and I know both of you passionately disagree about things, the fact that the policy says, except when a board has made a decision, it is time to move forward collectively and constructively. That doesn't mean that I can't still be outspoken about a bad decision that's been made. And I think that holds true for all of us. We don't, when we're elected, our First Amendment rights don't go away when we're elected. Secondly, I'm always wary about a policy that requires someone to promote something and to champion something, whether you agree with it or not, but there's a lot of room for interpretation in those statements in here. But asking someone to promote something and champion something, ask them to believe something. And so it's just, like I said, I think that it just infringes on my rights. When you blindly sign something and don't realize the implications of it on your voice later. I think when this came up earlier, I've expressed my concerns on this. I think one of the big omissions in this policy, when we talk about advocating, we're not talking about the community that elects us. Nowhere in this policy does it talk about the community that elects us and that we should be advocating for them in our board seats. Also, it fails to remind us of our responsibility, and it's a big responsibility of our authority here as school board members. And those were two changes that when it came back, when it was brought before us, I think in 2023, that never made it in because one, we never did this process, so kudos to our board leadership for having this process where we can talk about and vote and show where everyone stands on proposed amendments. We didn't do that in 2023 when this came up for us to take a second look at and make changes. So I brought up those concerns then. Those concerns continue to be my concerns today. And our board leadership didn't make any of those changes, and I believe you were on board leadership, so I didn't feel heard then either. So thirdly, I think blindly signing this by this board without really considering things, there's a lot of hypocrisy on this board when you say that everyone should be following this. Every single person on this board, I think at one time or another, has not been doing the things in this, the decide model, communicating, preparing.
I don't think decide models.
I mean, I know there are members of this board who haven't even probably read many of these policies up for discussion today, or some of the contracts that we've committed, so every single one of us. So it is the biggest piece of hypocrisy that all of you are signing this, because I know at time and again, each and every one of you have probably not been in accordance with it. So shall we strip you of your leadership? I mean, it's just open and rife with problems. And again, I go back to, first and foremost, I feel like it's an infringement on free speech. This free First Amendment rights that we all have that doesn't go away when you're elected. And if I don't like something, I may go along, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to say that it was a bad choice. So that's my reasoning, and I would caution at binding someone's hands and having those kinds of repercussions for not signing it. Because I think that could have implications that go beyond just your what you think you're going to immediately accomplish. I would also say this isn't even required by state law. There's no reason. I mean, we have plenty of ethics laws on the books that govern how we both, we have laws that govern how we should perform our duties, and we also have laws that govern how we should behave ethically. That's all taken care of. We don't need this policy. And I would just urge everyone to just perform your duties to the best of your abilities and in accordance with your conscience. That's all I have to say.
So I would like to just remind everybody about when we revised this policy in 2023. We did not hold a separate meeting, that's fine. We actually went paragraph by paragraph over months. So we would do one meeting, maybe even sometimes more than one meeting, and we worked on advocate earnestly. And then we did another meeting, or even 2 meetings on lead responsibly. So this was all done in the public. Everybody on the board was able to make changes, make suggestions, change words. So all of that was done in the public.
Everyone but me, Mrs.
So if you
Turchick.
chose
Everyone
not to
but me.
participate, or you chose not to,
No.
I brought up these same
Miss-
concerns. I
Mi-
brought up these
Mrs.
same
Brusalis,
concerns.
I asked
And
her
they were
what-
just ignored. Remember, it was a different board, and you were vice
so you're just
president.
interrupting me.
Well, again,
Let's let,
So we did all of these, and so it was not brought up, and if it was the majority of the board that decided on the words and the language that we put here.
there were no votes.
There was an overall
There was
vote.
an overall vote, but there was no vote like this on amendments and whatnot, so we never were able to.
Did you
get
vote
this.
no on this when we brought it up for discussion?
Yes,
Okay.
but like I said, I don't necessarily disagree with the basic general ideas, but I'm not going to sign something that's going to strip
And you don't
my-
have to sign it, but my amendment that
oh.
I made was if you're not going to assign the policy that the board voted, including yourself, to have as our principles for governance and leadership, that there is a consequence. That is what mine is.
well,
Mike has
I
called
guess-
the question, so, unless someone else had their hand up before he did, so.
I actually did have my
Okay.
hand up. And I just wanted to say that this change is unnecessary. It doesn't impact the board's operation. It doesn't even move the needle. What moves the needle is how we operate, lead responsibly, advocate earnestly, govern effectively, plan thoroughly, evaluate continuously, communicate clearly, and act ethically. There are times, some more than others, don't operate by this, but yet they signed it. So what does that say? What does it say that you signed it? It means nothing if you sign it. You don't act this way. You don't act this way. What's the matter if you sign it? So I think that this change is absolutely unnecessary. I think what's important is that we all start to operate what this says. And we should do this. We don't need comments from the audience because they're not part of the board. You have plenty of time at the end of the meeting, stop it, or we're gonna we'll go online. We'll let you go online and listen in.
Go for it.
They're pretty ignorant, aren't they? They're just very, very ignorant people. So this, in my mind, this is an unnecessary change. It doesn't move the needle whatsoever. All it is an attack on somebody who hasn't signed it. And yet people here who've signed it don't act this way either. So we need to not do this change. I would say not put this change in, but yet we should start to act better and follow this. All right, I'm done. You want to call the question now? All right, call the
Need
question.
a second?
Need a second?
You need a second?
Oh,
Okay.
All right. All in favor of calling the question?
Yeah.
Yes.
No?
No.
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 So that's 3 noes.
I think that was 4 no's.
Who's the fourth?
Did you say no?
I said no.
Yeah,
Oh, you
Joe
said
said
no.
Three,
Oh,
and then
okay,
Joe's
sorry.
4.
We lost Leslie.
So it's
Mhm.
3-4. So
Doesn't pass.
motion.
Needs 2/3.
Motion fails.
It fails.
So I'm going to agree with Mr. Morissette that you're correct. Probably not every board member follows these every single time, but it is a goal. And I think being a board member, leading the school, that you make your effort to work at these, okay? Like, we're not all perfect. There are probably some that I don't follow all the time, but I make an effort. So, and I signed it. And so did everybody else but one person. The same person who just said she voted to pass this policy. and put it in our policy. So that was the time to even vote no, or to speak up if there's things that she disagreed with.
Again,
So for that, no, don't interrupt, please.
Well, I thought you were done. You paused.
So for that is why I think if we're going to keep this policy, then, I mean, we should, if that's the case, we should have somebody make a motion to get rid of it, if that's what you think, if we're not going to follow this. But if this is the goal, that we're going to work towards these things, then we sign it. And if you're not going to sign it, you're not operating in good faith. And that's why I have this amendment.
So I just want to make a point that there are some school districts that do not have an 011. Again,
That's
it
okay, we're
is not, you're
Pine-Richland.
interrupting me and you're in violation of your own policy. There are school districts that don't have 011 at all. It is an unnecessary policy, number one. There are school districts that have the policy but have purposely removed this very line about signing it because that it's, one, unenforceable, and two, it is an infringement on school director rights. So, this is, it's, again, just because it's a feel-good policy and you admit that no one can follow it perfectly, so you step out of line once, you're going to lose your board position.
No, you just don't sign it. You lose your board
Okay.
position. We're not
Okay,
gonna
but
police
then
everybody.
so you don't sign it, so you can sign it but not follow it.
Signing it is
So what
you are
does signing
making-
it mean? If
You're
you
making
don't
an
have to
effort
follow
to
it?
work towards these goals. That's what
Are
signing
you?
it means.
Are you? Because
Yeah.
you're still interrupting me. That's all I have to say.
Other comments?
Miss,
Yeah, I think it's beneficial to aspire to how sort of the norms of how we operate and work together. I've never taken this policy as one that everybody has to be perfect with, and certainly I think there are different interpretations of words and bullet points. I thought in the last revision of this, which was, I think we maybe started it in like a December and rolled through the early summer. What it did was provide a time at every meeting to talk about the goals and aspirations for how the group was going to work together. I thought that was beneficial. And so, I think there is, as leadership and governance, I think there's benefit to having principles that outline some of the aspirations, goals, and norms.
I just have one question for Mr. Hoffman. Does this violate our rights?
I don't know that it doesn't violate rights,
Okay.
but I think it doesn't violate them.
Can
It'll
you,
allow us to
can
answer
you,
your-
okay, so it doesn't violate our rights. So signing it doesn't violate our rights.
Well, again, you can't compel an individual director
Right.
to.
But
sign.
if I were to sign it, it doesn't mean my rights have been violated.
Correct.
Okay. Then my second question would be, when it comes to principles, I mean, to me, and I might be interpreting this incorrectly, it's just guiding, right? It guides us. It tells us, what the ideal would be, what the vision, and it also informs the public that we serve, what we're going to be doing, why we're sitting here, and the things that we're moving towards. Not in perfection, but in just commonality. I know you don't have to answer that part. Yours was mostly rights. So it's not violating my rights even if I sign it. That's just what I want to make clear.
Okay.
I would just like to make the point that I have been accused here of not supporting public education because I happen to think that charter schools have a place in public education in Pennsylvania. So it's up to interpretation and how far shall we take the signing? Well, you signed it, and if you aren't following it, why have it if you can't sanction it? And I just think it's a dangerous road for us to go down if we are requiring the signing away of our ability to talk about certain things because it may or may not violate. And that accusation has come from members of this board, not presently on this board, but in previous boards. So I just think this is just, it's a snowball that you have to be careful with, because it can, this can affect everyone, depending on where you land on any one of these things, and can be interpreted a multitude of ways. So I just think it's not a very clear policy. It's again, a feel-good policy, but is it one that actually helps us to move the ball forward? It has, I think, been weaponized more than it has helped us to become more of a cohesive board group.
All right, thank you. Other comments? Or we move on to the vote?
I think Dr. Miller
Yeah.
has his hand up.
Just one. I think about, again, a lot of the items that come before the board are quickly reviewed. They're voted on. We're moving on. There are fewer times when we're engaged in, longer discussions on an item. And so I think this is not necessarily for the routine items that are pretty quick and we move through on a regular basis, but this is a guide around sort of keeping the strategic view of the district. When there is conflict or there are differing viewpoints on things, and I'm thinking about the either my role, which is the right to be heard but not vote, or senior leaders to share their professional view on something. I wouldn't want someone to think that if I share a view professionally in my role that is different than the majority of the board, I'm certainly not giving up that right. And when I share my professional perspective, even if a majority of the board disagrees with me, I have the right to be heard. The board has the right to vote, but ultimately, we're going to implement what the board votes. And there are numerous examples of where that happens. And so that, I think that's a positive thing. And we can do that in a way that, again, promotes civil discourse or whatever the other words are that are in there. So, again, for what it's worth, that's my perspective, having, again, served in this role. I'm in my 12th year doing this.
Ashley had her hand up, I think.
I was just gonna, sorry, there was a lot said. And one thing I picked up on was you mentioned your support of choice when it comes to education, and that maybe in the past people have brought that, up against you. And I think that you can do both at the same time. You can promote public education, and you can promote your view on the choice, but then there also can be pushback of that view, and there can be hesitation to hold certain positions. And I don't think that violates your right to feel that way. It just there may be a consequence of that view. That's all. So, and I think that's natural.
And it's the consequence that I'm concerned about, that it can be weaponized. We have seen that this policy has allowed the politicization of the activities of school board members, which again is a violation of my rights to associate and to be an active in my community. And what's to say it's not going to be you next or someone else on this board that this policy is used to politicize. I think the less restrictions that we have, and requiring school board members to sign this, and then to threaten to take away their ability to participate fully as a member of this board and to represent their community because they haven't signed something that they're not required by law to sign, that has no implications on their legal status as a school board member, it's just a bridge too far. Like, it's one thing to pass something and have these feel good ideas, but then to tie to it something that has already been so politicized, I think is a dangerous thing to do.
I'd like to call the question.
Second.
Okay, question's been called. All in favor?
Yes. Yes.
All opposed?
No.
I heard 3 noes and 4 yeses.
Okay,
Call the question takes 2/3.
let's go roll call through that.
Okay. still not on, so let me just cross them out.
Is it the roll call for the public question or for the?
Yes, call the question, Joe, because it was confusing for Mrs. Williams. We want to do a roll call.
Mrs. Turchek?
No.
Mrs. Brusalis?
Yes.
Mr. Cassidy?
Yes.
Mr. Morset?
Yes.
Mr. Wheathorn?
Yes.
Mrs. Fortier?
No.
Mrs. Hillman?
Yes.
5 yeses, 2 nos.
That's 2/3.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
Now you can vote on,
Would you mind reading
Motion.
the motion, please, if you have it? Do you have it?
Yeah, hang on. with me
Okay,
one
yeah, no
second.
worries.
Let me
Yep.
find my,
Yep, no problem.
okay. This board policy supports the principles for governance and leadership adopted by the board and signed by individual school directors within 60 days of board reorganization. Failure to do so would cause a school director to be removed as any committee chair or officer.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you. And it's been seconded, so let's do a roll call.
Okay, just let me make my notes. Okay. Mrs. Turchik?
Yes.
Mrs. Brusalis?
No.
Mr. Morset?
No.
Mr. Cassidy?
Yes.
Mrs. Wheathorn? Or Mr. Wheathorn, I'm sorry.
No.
Sorry about that. Mrs. Fortier?
Yes.
Mrs. Hillman?
No.
Did I get everybody? Yeah. So 3 yeses, 4 nos.
Motion does not pass.
Does not pass.
Okay, other changes to 011. No other changes? We will move on. Mrs. Turchek, do you want to pull your, what was it, membership? Which one did
004.
you-
Well, I'll put it back, and, yeah, I'm going to put it back. I don't need it.
You don't need it?
I'm not making any changes on
Okay.
it right now.
Well, I'm going to call it up. If you don't want to make any changes, that's fine.
Okay, that's fine, call it up.
And
I
then
don't
we'll
have
see
it.
if we'll move to 004.
Okay.
If there is anyone who has any changes for 004 since it was pulled. Mrs. Turchek does not have any.
Wait, I think this is the one in it. I might have gotten the other in service wrong.
With the hyphenation,
Yeah.
Yeah, 004.
what paragraph is that?
There's a whole section on in service, and in service is hyphenated.
We'll just do a
Yeah.
find and replace. We'll find
Okay.
it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Okay, there's no need to call a vote on that one.
right.
Can I ask a question here about, so we have a line here. If in attendance, this is under removal, at any meeting, she or he shall neglect to refuse to act in official capacity as a school director. The remaining members of the board may declare such office vacant. What rises to that level if you are actually present?
Can you tell me where you're reading,
Where is that,
please?
under removal?
This is under removal.
Which paragraph?
Second paragraph,
Second
second it's like the last sentence.
Okay.
Like I think it's only one sentence, but it's the second half.
Or if in attendance at any meeting, he, she.
Yeah. What
I don't
concept,
have
has
an
that
answer for
ever
that.
happened?
I
Is that
just
like
don't
not
know.
voting
Like
at a
they don't
meeting?
vote or something?
Is that when you refuse to vote?
Well, if you give me 1 second here, let me see if I can pull up the school code. I have no idea what that means.
It says 18. I don't know what
Doesn't.
18 and 22 refer to.
It refers to, 18 refers to 24 PS 319, public school code 319.
I mean, it's in the school code.
Yeah, it's pulled directly. I clicked on the citation.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
just.
And it doesn't say what that is?
It doesn't say what that is.
Okay.
And I don't have an answer for you. 'Cause I don't know.
Okay. Thank you. I don't think I have any changes.
Anyone else? All right, let's move on to. My mic on. Okay, no other changes. We'll move on to the final one, which is 005, PR current organization. I believe we have some PSBA changes, so this might be difficult to work through. I believe, was this the one where there was some current?
Yeah, this is the one I asked to be pulled because there was a court case
Court
earlier
case.
last year
Let's-
that
can we deal with that
changed.
first?
Yeah. So this is under officers, and it's the very last paragraph. So I'd like to make a motion to remove that last paragraph and replace it with the language, officers of the board may be removed from their position for cause by the affirmative vote of a majority of the full number of school directors following written notice and an opportunity for a hearing. And this is based on Mr. Hoffman's input, and like I said, there was a court case on this very issue in 2024.
So wait, here we have with the red lines, we're not doing that, you have a different.
This is
wording.
Mr. Hoffman's
Mr.
suggested
Hoffman's
language, and I
suggestion.
actually
Okay,
read
that's-
both,
okay.
and I like Mr. Hoffman's language.
Okay,
I think
that's
it's a
fine.
little more concise.
Okay, I see that.
Do you want me to read it again?
Yeah, yeah.
It's in the
and tell
email,
me-
right?
Yeah, it
It's
should be in the
this- You
email,
have this
yes.
email that Barb gave us, it's in.
Mrs.
Oh, it's in there.
Williams, it's in the
that.
email.
Just read it one more time.
Officers of the
It's a motion.
board may
Oh.
be removed from their position for cause by the affirmative vote of a majority of the full number of school directors following written notice and an opportunity for a hearing. Excuse me.
I need a second.
Oh, I'll
Oh.
second it, second.
I thought you were coughing and pausing. We have a second. Okay. All right, thank you. Any discussion on this? No discussion. We'll move into a vote. All in favor? of-
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. All opposed? I believe we have, it was
Is
affirmative.
Joe still on? Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So 7 yes.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute.
It happens. Okay. Any other changes before we move on to the PSBA red line?
Well, I mean, I think mine kind of coincide with the PSBA ones, so,
You're okay to move to the PSBA?
well, can I mean, some of them not, can I run through my changes?
Do you want to just go in order through the
Oh, yeah,
policy,
we can
maybe?
start.
Through the
Wanna go
policy,
through-
I'm going from
wanna
the
go through
beginning.
an order through policy? All right, we'll start.
And
So
some
we
of it
pull the-
coincides, some of it
We pull the
doesn't.
red line. Is that what you want us to do, pull the red line right now?
No, I'm going off the original version, but it incorporates some of the red line stuff. You could maybe
Okay.
follow along with the red
We
line.
got to make sure Mrs. Williams up to speed with this.
I'm
Yeah.
on the original.
Yep.
So in the first paragraph, under organization meeting, second sentence, there's a reference to board members. I'd like to make a motion to change that to school directors.
That's the PSBA change.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Second.
Okay, motion's been made to change the second sentence in the first paragraph, given to all board members to given to all school directors. Any discussion on that? That's a PSBA suggested change. Okay, all in favor?
Yes.
Yes.
All opposed?
Yes.
No one opposes, so it passes.
All right, the second change, I think it's on your PSBA, that changes who would be presiding over the election of the temporary president. Mrs. Williams, I mean, I brought this up with Mr. Hoffman. There is nothing precluding you from continuing to preside unless you don't want to preside anymore, I think is maybe.
I'll leave that up to the board. I don't mind doing it, but
Okay.
I'll leave that up to you all to
I mean,
decide.
I actually prefer keeping it the way we
Yeah.
have it.
Yeah.
and-
So we don't need to do anything.
Right,
We're gonna-
like, it's
Yeah.
our tradition, and I
Right.
think that's,
I support
I mean,
that,
we
yeah.
could consider adding language that if Mrs. Williams isn't available, we could add, but I don't think we have to. Right, Mr. Hoffman? We could just leave it as is? Or do we have to clarify if she's not present, who those people would be? It's just the remaining board members.
Yeah, I don't think you need to do
Okay.
anything. to the
I
policy.
propose just leaving it that way, and if I'm hearing no objections, I'm going to move on to the next one. Next one's another easy one. I'd like to make a motion to change the mention of board members in the very last sentence, very last words of that first paragraph under order to school directors.
That's also the PSBA one. right?
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Could that be similar to in-service if there's going to be more school directors to board members? Why, I don't understand why.
It's
we
only
would-
So
three
we don't have
times.
to vote on all of it.
I didn't see if any of the rationale. My thinking in changing this is that they were elected and not sworn in yet, so that these early references to school director versus board member is just I don't know. That's the way I'm reading it, but I don't know if Mr. Hoffman cares either way. It probably doesn't matter either way.
I've heard them called both in my whole career, and I consider them the same. So
Yeah,
if there's a
I do
preferred
too.
one,
I
let's
don't
just
know
use
why they
whatever the
changed
preferred
it.
one is.
I think maybe the regulation or the legislation may have changed the wording, possibly, if there's anything new with. it's the
Well, I
only
think
thing
the
can-
law
it's the only
refers
thing
to
I
them
can
as
think
school
of,
directors.
so,
And maybe that's why. I mean, this is a simple change.
Yeah.
We can make a quick vote.
Okay, so again, go through the change so we're caught up.
This is just the last sentence, last words of the first paragraph under order, changing board members to school directors.
Did you get a second?
Yes.
Was that-
Second.
Okay.
I must be reading something different.
This is the current has.
Okay, okay, I must have something different. Okay, so we're making a change, and we got it seconded. Any discussion on that item? Okay, let's vote. All in favor of making that change to, from board members to school directors?
Yes.
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 All opposed? Okay, passes.
So the next one is the next sentence, the next paragraph first. PSBA, I don't have the PSB language, but our tradition is the solicitor, correct? Swears in
If
the
he's a
new board
notary,
members.
They have to be a notary, it's not just necessarily.
No,
Right,
according
my
to the law,
understanding.
a member of the bar, correct?
No. Has to be either a notary or a judge, or in an election year, the board member who is appointed as the temporary president
Are you
has
sure?
the authority to administer the oath.
Because I looked up this law today, and I think it mentioned members of the bar.
Does it matter?
Does it matter? I don't know. Does it matter? Who has normally done it?
We've had the school solicitor, but they have been notary, and you're not a notary.
Do you have one?
We could bring a notary, yeah.
Bring one along.
I mean, we can have it be I do think, section.
Do we need to check on that one? or-
I'll pull
or
it up
you-
right now.
You're pretty square on that, Matt, so,
I think I'm pretty square.
yeah, okay. All right.
All right,
Where was that paragraph?
can we go on?
Right now, your paragraph says the temporary president or other authorized
the front.
persons, so.
That seems legal and appropriate and flexible, which seems like a good idea.
Yeah, I
Agreed.
would make a motion that we just leave that little paragraph the way we had it in our
Here it is.
policy.
We'll give her a minute to read that.
Okay, maybe it's just acknowledgements can be taken by
That would make
a
sense.
member of the bar. Okay.
Okay, all right, very good. We'll move
So
on.
we want to keep it temporary president? Okay.
Yep.
Okay. And I'd like to keep, I don't want to, I know PSBA recommends us change the shall to may, but don't we have to administer the oath? Is that really a may, Mr. Hoffman?
Well, conceivably, an elected or re-elected member
Uh-huh.
could go to a magistrate and be sworn in. So I think that's why they have may.
Okay. But they still have to be sworn in, so does that offer confusion?
Well, it may offer confusion, but they have to
Okay.
be sworn in.
Okay. I don't know.
Are you making a motion then to change?
To
it?
keep, I don't
These
know.
are-
It doesn't-
Actually, it's a motion not to change.
I was gonna
Or-
not change it,
Well,
but.
currently
We don't
says
need to make
shall.
a motion to
But-
change
but-
if we don't.
Right,
change
it
Right,
it.
if
stays
we,
the
unless
same.
somebody feels strongly about it.
Yeah, we don't have to make a motion if we're not changing it from
Right.
our
Correct.
current
Right.
policy, so we
Right.
can just go on to the next section, right?
If
Right.
we're all
And
good
the
with that.
sentence
Yeah.
does say
Yeah.
that if a person hasn't been previously administered the oath, then they shall take the oath.
Yes, I think shall
I think
belongs
it's-
in there.
Worded
Okay.
correctly.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you, Matt, that helps.
So the next change, and this is a PSBA change, it is in the, we're looking at the numbered items. It would be our number 3, but I want to talk about that number 3, but we can change the language first. In number 3, maybe we can take this together. I'd like to make a motion to change where it says his or her duties in number 3 and number 5, change that to official.
And that's the recommended by
That's in the
PSBA.
PSBA.
That's fine, I'll second that.
Okay. Any discussion on that? Okay, no discussion. We'll go to a vote. All in favor of changing number 3 from his, her to official, and number 4, section, paragraph where it says his, her to official. All in favor?
Yes.
Yes.
All opposed? Okay, motion passes.
Do we need?
Just,
Oh, go ahead.
Mrs. Miller's back on, just so as everybody.
Okay, so do we need to
Thank
change, make motions and officially change numbering? So, if everyone agrees, number 3 refers to the treasurer, so each of these numbers, I think, should refer to one of the offices. And so 1 refers to president and vice president, 2 refers to the election of the treasurer. Number 3 refers back to the treasurer and what the treasurer has to do in order to be. So I'd like to remove that 3 and just have it read 1, 2, and have 2 paragraphs under 2 regarding the treasurer. And then change number 4 to 3. And then same thing there. Our current 4 and 5 refer to the secretary. So I'd like to eliminate number 5 and just have the 2 paragraphs under number 3.
Our
And-
number 5 is the Beatty, isn't that Beatty and?
No, I'm looking at our current. You're looking at the PSBA version.
Oh, okay, so the numbering.
So 1, 2, under 2, there are 2 paragraphs referring to treasurer. I'd like both of those under 2. Eliminate this 3, make 4, 3. And then our current number 5 refers back to the secretary, so eliminate the numbering there. So it would be 1, 2, 3, and 4. Does that make sense?
Are you combining the 2 paragraphs into one, or
Yeah,
are you
2
keeping
and
them
3 are
separate?
combined into 1.
Okay.
4 and 5 are combined into 1. So the numbering will be 1, 2,
Yeah.
3, and 4.
That's fine.
Okay,
I'll second that. that's
wait,
fine.
one. Hang on one second.
If all we're doing is adjusting the number.
Yeah,
We don't
have
need to vote?
yeah.
Okay, perfect, even better.
And then I know the PSBA version has us taking out, and I don't know, did we take that out? Or obviously PSBA doesn't have our version. I think, my opinion, and see what everyone else thinks, is that the representatives to the Beatty Board are they're kind of like offices. They represent us, they cast votes, they represent our community through us.
Right.
I would keep them there, because I think that's an important role. They're making decisions just like us regarding the students at Beatty.
What's PSBA say we should do?
It was struck.
It was struck, but they don't have it.
Right.
This isn't a consideration for them. We struck
Right,
it.
that's correct.
I would rather keep them in,
Yes.
because I feel like
Okay.
that's an official role that
Right.
needs to happen. Like, we don't
I
have a
would
choice
support that.
whether.
So Christina, I do support that. The last sentence, though, in number 6, and I'm looking at our
Our new 4.
Yeah,
Yeah.
our current policy. It says the alternate representative will also be elected by formal board action.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't do that.
I don't think
We
we
do
do.
We
that.
haven't elected a alternate, and I
Have
don't know
we?
if we
No,
need to
have
do that
not.
if we lose a representative, or do we do that at the time? Because we haven't done that yet.
Correct.
Okay,
We
so
have
we
just
can
done
even
2.
delete that last sentence then. The alternate representative will also be elected by the
So
board.
is that, are
That's
you
in the
reading that,
current-
that there's like a third person, like an alternate?
I'm just reading what the current policy says, under the current number 6, last sentence.
Okay. Are you making a motion?
Yeah, I don't,
Have you made your official motion yet? Because you
we're
can-
not
I haven't made
changing
any
anything,
motions.
so
Oh,
nothing's
I'm just
changed.
saying,
Okay.
let's keep
I'm sorry?
it, so we don't have
Yeah,
to
if
make
we
a
don't
So
change
I'll
it,
motion.
we
make
don't
that
make a
motion.
motion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Let's just
So
say
then
that.
I'll make the motion to
That's how we got in trouble with.
delete the
policy
last
111.
sentence of number 6 in the current policy that reads, "The alternate representative will also be elected by formal board action."
I second that.
Okay. And I'm reading that just to make sure that the word alternate representative is not reflective of the term on an alternate basis. That's totally a separate item. I just want to make sure I have it in my mind.
Yeah.
So you elect 2, so that's obvious. And they will have a 2-year term on an alternating basis. So that, and then we have an alternate representative. Okay, I'm good. Okay, any other discussion on this? Okay, all in favor of removing the alternate representative will also be elected by formal board action? All in favor?
Yes.
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 All opposed? Motion passes. Okay.
Mr.
Morissette, just the one thing that confuses me within this provision, and I don't know what the jointure agreement says, but it says that you're electing people for a 2-year term, but the school code provides for 3-year terms. So I just would want to go back and check the jointure agreement to see if somehow that's different. So just bringing that to your attention, that's all. Yeah.
And I have no idea. It has been 2-year terms staggered since I've been here. So
I'm just reading a section of the school code, it says 3. So we'll check the
Yeah.
jointure agreement.
Okay. Mrs. Williams, will you be able to check that, or how do we get that?
I'll look at it.
You'll look at it?
I'll
Okay.
communicate with Dr.
Okay.
Miller and-
All right. If you got the ball on that, that's fine. Okay, thank you for that.
Okay.
Okay, moving on.
Yeah, so the next thing I'd like to propose is under appointments. I'd like to add, and just to back up and to explain my thinking, towards the end of the policy, there's board liaisons, and it kind of sticks out there on its own. Since these are, in effect, appointments to PSBA Legislative and Pine Township Parks and Recs, and we just took, and I think A.W. Beatty is already addressed, so we don't need the number 2 in board liaisons. I was thinking about inserting a new number 6 that would be board liaison positions such as PSBA. Let me just make the motion. I'd like to make a motion to insert a new number 6, board liaison positions such as PSBA/Legislative and Pine Township Parks and Recreation under the appointments, with the intent to remove that section that kind of sticks out on its own and doesn't really have a place.
Do you want to add food service onto that?
I mean, we
Well, I think
can, or
you
number
said, like,
7.
and other. Didn't you say, well, some of your language was like and other
And other.
positions, so maybe we don't need to. Like,
Yeah, there's
list
other
any more.
appointments the
Yeah.
board needs necessary is 7,
Yeah.
so we don't have to account for every single one of them.
All right,
But
do we have a
just-
second?
Second.
Okay. Would you read that again?
Sure. New
To
number
me.
6, board liaison positions such as PSBA/Legislative and Pine Township Parks and Recreation. And then the number 6 turns to 7, so the next line is the new number 7.
Okay, any discussion on that? No discussion, we'll go through a vote. All in favor of making that change? Christine, would you read that one more time, please?
Sure. New number 6, under appointments, board liaison positions such as PSBA/Legislative and Pine Township Parks and Recreation.
All in favor?
Yes.
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 All opposed? Motion passes.
So the next, the short paragraph at the end of this section, PSBA does recommend a change. I mean, we can discuss it. I don't think we need to change it. I feel like we have a mixed.
Where are you, where, I missed.
So
where
under
it says
appointments, appointees
That
serve at the
little
pleasure of the
paragraph?
board
Okay.
and may be removed.
Okay.
I think this section is different than the section of the board officers in that it's kind of a mixed bag of different kinds of appointees. And so that language above doesn't really apply. And the new language I feel is a little too restrictive because there are a couple of positions that are non-contractual. And so I would propose that we keep our language the way it is. Any contractual language, I believe, is covered by the phrase in accordance with the provisions of the law. because if we have a contract, we have to follow it according to the law. So that would be my recommendation. I don't know how other people feel about just keeping that language the way it is.
So
Yep,
no
agreed.
change, you recommend no change
No
according to
change.
PSBA?
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead.
Under resolutions, number 4, changing work sessions to joint governance. I'd like to make a motion to change in number 4 under resolutions, at the end, where it says work sessions, to change that to joint governance meetings.
I'll second.
Because that's really what we're talking about.
Yeah.
In our terminology.
Correct.
Sometimes work sessions are used to describe a planning meeting as well, as compared to a regular meeting. So it could be either of those things, not just a quote committee meeting or a joint governance. It could also be considered as a planning meeting versus a regular meeting.
So do we need to add that in?
Well, I think what Dr. Miller's comment suggesting is that you retain the reference to work sessions, but also perhaps add either as a new item or as an addition in paragraph 4 to joint governance meetings.
Okay, so I rescind my amendment, and I'd like to make a new amendment for number 5. Normal day, comma, place and time for, do we use the word open? I think this is where I started using that word open. It was because of all the references. Open joint governance meeting. Meetings, plural.
So that's a new number 5.
New number 5. Public.
New-
I thought we just
Somewhere
said
else.
public meetings. I thought we said public, not open.
It's a new number 5.
Yeah, I
So
don't know.
keep it-
I don't.
It's a new number 5, we're
I don't know
keeping
if I'd
4.
wanna go backwards. I don't think it changes the meeting.
I think we called it public instead of open the
did.
last
Open,
time. so just
okay.
to be
That's what I
con-
thought.
Okay, do we need to make an amendment then for,
Yes.
Or you can rescind it and redo it.
all right. Can I resend all of the above? Can we just start over?
Yeah, start with number
So
4
on
again.
number 4, I'd like to make a motion to change the word open to public.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Second.
Okay, so a motion's been made to change number 4 under resolutions to normal day, comma, place and time for public board work sessions. All in favor?
Yes.
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 All opposed? Okay, that motion passes.
Okay. I'd like to make a motion for a new number 5 that would read normal day, comma, place and time for public joint governance meetings.
Who was the second?
Motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion on that item?
Do we have to say public there for joint governance, or is it in?
Well, if you have
I would,
personnel.
Yeah.
Okay,
can
all
do
right.
that in
Let's
executive
keep
session.
public.
Okay. So motion on, there has been no discussion, so the motion is new number 5, normal day, comma, place and time for public joint governance meetings.
Second.
All, right? Correct?
Yeah, we're good, sorry.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, all in favor? Yes.
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 All opposed? Motion passes.
I'd like to make a motion on, under board, it's hard to explain, the board liaison section, which is kind of its own section. I'd like to make a motion to strike that entire section, since we've already addressed
Second.
all of those in another place. Mrs. Churchick seconds.
Okay, we have a motion that's been made and seconded to strike the full section of, give me the name again.
Board liaison.
It says board liaison.
Just strike
Yeah,
those
'cause
couple
I'm missing
sentences.
it.
It's right.
It's on the back, page 4 out of 5.
Yeah, for whatever reason, I don't see, oh, there it is. I do have it. I apologize. All right, motion is made and seconded to strike the whole paragraph where board liaison assignments shall include the following: 1, PSBA legislation, 2, AWBD Joint Operating Committee, and number 3, Pine Township Parks and Recreation, because that's already been assigned above. Any discussion? No discussion, move to vote. All in favor?
Yes.
Yes.
All opposed? Motion passes.
And that's all I have.
Okay, all right. Does that cover all of the PSBA recommended changes that you could see?
Well, there's a section on here, this is all this language for committees, and I feel like I didn't get a chance to digest that. Can we maybe revisit that at the meeting, because I don't think, like, I didn't really see this. I really want to think about it a little bit. Is that okay, instead of doing that tonight, the
Yeah,
section they're
is-
recommending
is
about
that-
committees?
is that
Can I
that one
just
here?
make
Yeah.
a comment why I didn't address it? Because we don't have
We don't have it
committees.
currently,
Yeah.
and I don't know how I feel about it. Like, I haven't had a chance to digest it. We can just leave it off, and if it's
Yeah.
something we want to add, because we still, are going to have
We
these.
can certainly do that. We
Okay,
have the
I would
prerogative
prefer to do that, please.
Other suggested changes to 005? Okay, all right. So with that, those items have now been pulled. We'll bring forward the changes for the first read,
For February 10th?
or does that come as an information item? Comes as
Historically, it's come as information
information
discussion
item?
first.
That's
yeah.
what I thought, yeah. Okay. All right, very good. All right, that takes care of item 2.01. Let's move on to 3.01, recognition of visitors, Mrs. Williams.
Okay, we do have somebody online. Mr. Stobener, if you could give Ms. Bear a call, I will go get the sign-in. Oh, she's here? Okay, well, we'll start with her while she's here. Never mind, Mr. Stobener, she's in person.
I need to bring, like, masking tape. It's like catching my sweater on my sleeve.
Bree Bear, Richland Road. I'd like to discuss policy 011, principles of governance. Advocate earnestly. Engage and represent the local community by seeking input and keeping the public informed. Transparency. Something you all ran on, remember? Mr. Whitethorn, care yet to share where you got the initial draft of this abomination of a library policy? Ms. Brusalis, care to share how much business your organization has pulled in since you've turned our district into a circus? Champion public education. How exactly are we doing this in Pine-Richland? By voting against our teachers, librarians, and counselors? By dismissing the input of our educators and administration at each and every meeting? Champion it, not work to destroy it from within. Lead responsibly. Prepare for, attend, and actively participate in board meetings. How often have we heard that you haven't had time to read something? Actively participate. Ms. Miller, looking at you, especially if you were here, that requires opening your mouth. Explain your votes. Explain why you abstain. The community deserves to understand your actions. Work together with civility and cooperation, respecting the individuals who hold differing opinions and ideas. There hasn't been a shred of this shown to anyone outside of Christina Brusalis and her minions. It is absolutely appalling behavior, and I wish the public were more aware of just how awful you treat the rest of the board, our teachers, and our administration. Collaborate with the superintendent, yet you often refuse to even acknowledge when he's spoken to you. You disrespect him regularly, despite him somehow staying composed through this nonsense and always being incredibly well prepared and ready to engage in open dialogue. Govern effectively. Review policy routinely. When will we be reviewing the opt-in requirement for the SEL curriculum? The policy you all fought so hard for that 99% of families actively opted into? Is this the opt-in rate that you were expecting? When will this be reevaluated? Can we not go back to the previous policy and remove the undue burden from our staff? Remain focused on the rule of governance, effectively delegating management tasks to the administration. It's laughable how far astray the board has gone from this. We've watched hours of meetings where you're fighting to have control over every single decision that's made in the classrooms of a district serving 6,400 students. Plan thoughtfully, allocate resources effectively. Mr. Kashani, as treasurer, can we get a presentation on the cost of billable hours from the solicitor to attend these marathon meetings and do who knows how much work behind the scenes? Our tax-paying community members would surely find value in that. Act ethically. Never use a position for improper benefit to self or others. Avoid actual perceived conflicts of interest. Ms. Brusalis, you run an organization to push conservative ideals into public education. The actions you take at this table directly promote your organization. I can imagine no clearer conflict of interest. How are you allowed to sit here? Can our solicitor please review the ethic laws you are bound to? It's a bold choice as a director who gets more airtime than everyone else combined to try to play the victim card tonight, citing infringement of your First Amendment rights. Infringement from a policy that basically says work honestly and be a decent human being. You're opposed because you're not required by law to act in this manner. In reviewing
15-second
this
warning.
policy, I see why you cannot in good conscience sign such an oppressive policy. Please reflect on the actions you've taken as a board. Where's the benefit to our community? Do better.
Next speaker.
Our next speaker is Rosie O'Grady Ravish.
Hi, I'm Rosie O'Grady Ravish. I live on Jenny Drive in Richland. I have a son that was enrolled at Pine-Richland until 2019. He had an IEP. I was also a playground recess monitor at Eden Hall. And of all that I have witnessed, you guys are the worst of them all. How you treat our teachers, our staff, our administrators. Am I forgetting anyone? Oh yeah, our students. How you treat them. Shame on you. And I see your smirk, honey. Back when Eden Hall opened, it didn't even have library books for kids in special education. That's because not all kids enter reading at grade level. Many of these kids are reluctant and struggling readers. Back then, teachers were certified or trained in spell read. Teachers and parents were extremely frustrated because programs such as Wilson, Orton Gillingham, and Linda Mood Bell were out of reach. Access to training or materials was based on seniority instead of immediate need. Back then, special education teachers and 3 full-time reading specialists at Eden Hall had absolutely no opportunities to collaborate. Kids in special education didn't get to qualify to work with a reading specialist. And you know what? Some of those kids made no progress at all. By speaking up, I hope that what I did would have changed that. I don't know how Eden Hall is today. I don't have a kid in the district anymore, but I still live here. But what I do know today is you can't even fill your paraprofessional openings. Nobody wants to work here because of how you treat people. You do not have the IEP families here in this room because they are exhausted, because they have to get a sitter for their kids, because they're working multiple jobs. I am standing here before you today on their behalf. It's sickening what you are doing. You waste resources with the book banning. You're extremely selfish and toxic. And no, I don't thank you for working hard because you're not getting anything worthwhile done. And no, I don't thank you for delaying the teacher contract. You don't mess with people's lives while you wallow in your white privilege. A Google search demonstrates how hypocritical your
15-second warning.
Christian crusade is. Your personal financial aspirations for the district is pretty transparent. No wonder why you wouldn't sign it. Follow the money, Felicia.
Next speaker.
Next speaker is Jennifer Buse.
Hello, Jennifer Buse. I have 3 kids still in the district. I live in Richland. I find it interesting that Ms. Brusalis says that it's being weaponized, that she didn't sign policy 001, Principles of Governance. I had been asking for months why the board wasn't governing rather than managing the district's teachers. I was looking at this policy and wondering, asking questions of the board, why weren't you leading responsibly? Why weren't you governing rather than trying to manage our librarians, our counselors, our teachers? Our superintendents, why are we spending 20 hours in a month perseverating on problems that don't actually even exist in Pine-Richland? Why did we spend months evaluating the counselors, what the counselors wanted for? There's no data that said we had any problems with counseling. In the stakeholder surveys, parents are happy with the counseling. It's the same thing with the books. There's no data that says we have any issue with books in our libraries. Just because 5 or 10 people in our community who are taxpayers have a problem with it, the students are begging you, the parents are begging you, leave the libraries alone. There's no problem. If you have a problem with something your kid is reading, have a conversation with them and call the library. They'll be happy to help you. There was public comment by Ms. Brusalis at a political event, that you don't agree with the majority of PSBA. So you are the one who created an anti-PSBA for political conservative values. You're not being it's not being weaponized against you because you didn't sign it. Once we found out you didn't sign it from a right to know request, it all became clear why you didn't sign it, because you have no intention of following these principles. As a reminder, Hillman and Brusalis voted against 3 of the 4 PSBA platform objectives, against equitable state funding for schools. They said because PR would lose money closing the gap between high wealth and low wealth districts. They voted against passing charter school reform to hold charter schools to high performance and reducing the financial burden on public schools. They voted against expanding the PA free breakfast program at PSBA because not every student in Pine-Richland needs this. I would like to see you make data-informed decisions going forward. I would like to see you following the principles of governance. Of course, it's not going to be against the law, but neither are all of our other policies. You don't get subjected to lawsuits for not following them. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to go to our next person online. Mr. Staburn, if you didn't give us a phone number, so never mind. Next person, Chris Bono.
Hello, Chris Bono, one child in the district. Some winners tonight, Mr. Kashani, Ms. Miller, and Mr. Cassidy for either not tuning in or tuning in from the comfort of their own home and not having to endure this. And also Mr. Hoffman's law firm. I mean, who knew how lucrative this was going to be for you guys when you get the contract? So well done. Losers, Logic. Tina, somehow forgetting Robert's rules, the expert through 14 hours of bullshit meetings, and yet forgetting when you
Please
can
watch the
measure-
language, please.
I'll watch it. You can censor me if you want, like you censor books. Also, Tina railing against, waxing eloquently, so eloquently against the policy she voted for. Man, if the policy was so terrible, if it SUCKED so bad, why would you vote for it? Another loser, Phil, you almost made it through a meeting without mansplaining or losing your temper. Once again, you threatened to clear the room. I think this is 4 meetings in a row. Maybe if you knew how to run a meeting, or maybe you should actually do it. The boy who cried wolf here. Good governance. Why is it that we have all these changes and none of you have seen them in advance? Deliberation has to occur in public, but there's no reason why if you have changes to a policy, you can't email them in advance to all the board so they can read them. At times tonight, it was like I was at a nursing home board meeting. Huh? What? Slow down. Huh? What? It's comical. And finally, I just want to read a quote. Parents send their children to Pine-Richland because this school district has a reputation for providing exceptional education. I want to ensure that this high-quality education continues and is not sidetracked with non-educational concerns. March 29th, 2023, Phil Morissette. You're doing a hell of a job, buddy.
Next speaker is Brittany Kindersmith.
Hi, Brittany Kindersmith, Richland Township. I know there were, at different points tonight, about 50 people watching online. And in case any of those folks don't have policy 011 in front of them, the big piece that Mrs. Brusalis was debating is under the first section, which is titled Advocate Earnestly. For clarity's sake, I wanted to mention what it says in this section. The things that she is wary about signing a requirement to promote in policy 011 is actually just one thing, which is public education. What the policy states the board members are to champion is public education, done so by engaging members of local, state, and federal legislative bodies. It does not say board members cannot like or support parochial, private, or charter schools. In fact, multiple board members, past and present, have elected to utilize non-public schools for their children. It does not say you cannot support school choice. It just says that you will promote public education as a keystone of democracy. So, Mrs. Brusalis, you have now publicly stated that you will not sign it because you are wary of being asked to promote and champion public education. So if anyone listening is a proponent of public schools, please hear and believe Mrs. Brusalis when she says she is not willing to agree to champion it within her capacity as your elected official to this board, a public school board. I'd also like to add a little off topic, but also on topic of people doing their jobs and doing them well. As a huge proponent of public education, I'd like to add that we have some super incredible staff in this public school district. And during the 3 recent virtual days, I wanted to say that I was just so impressed by my son's first grade teacher, who is Miss Prinz at Hants. She handled these kids' unending requests to use the bathroom, show her toys, my son making unsolicited and I'm sure unwelcome fart noises into his microphone. She handled all of these things with grace and patience, just like so many of our other district professionals. She is dedicated to her craft and she is excellent at it. And also a shout out to Mrs. Gearin, who somehow I noted popped into literally every single virtual classroom throughout the day to check in on not only how her students were doing, but also her staff. So thank you to the Hants staff.
Our next speaker is Claire Hudak.
Third time, I have to ask you guys to pay attention. I know the camera's on me when I'm talking, but I think the camera should pan to the usual guys that don't listen. Mrs. Fortier, Mrs. Terchak, Dr. Miller, thank you. Thank you. There are not enough thank yous. Your positive work is known and it will be remembered. But for the rest of you, the amount of time and resources that you have wasted is just absolutely absurd. You should be embarrassed, but you guys don't really have that in you. You continue to create problems that do not exist, but you seem to ignore real problems that are going on. And I brought it up last time, and I'm going to bring it up as another example, like the issues that arose during the high school lockdown that happened this past September. This board should be figuring out ways to improve the communication that goes on during a lockdown. There were times when teachers and administrators could not talk to each other during that whole entire period because the internet could not handle it. There were workers here that did not know what was going on because there was a lack of communication because the school needs to be brought up to speed. Things like that is what will kill students. But back to you guys, since this meeting is about your governance and your ethnic policies. I've watched so many people come up here and give life experiences and their professional opinions, and the few of you just continue to just keep ignoring it. And you folks will be known for the board that insulted so many, from students to long lifetime professionals. You guys will be known for the ones that created negative chaos, and you will be known for the ones that wasted so much time. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Ann Myers.
Hello, Ann Myers, one student in the district. First, I would like to thank Dr. Miller for discussing the Nickel Boys and the Kite Runner. I read them this week. They were so good. And I maybe wouldn't go so far as to say I'm changed by them, but I think in the world that we live in today, they gave me more empathy and perspective than I had before, and I really appreciate that. So thank you for that. And in the similar vein, I would also like to just also point out how truly amazing the staff is here in the school district. There have been several instances over the past few weeks where like friends of mine who live in other school districts have told me about like parallel programs that they have and how they're run there. And then I talk about, I was discussing how those programs are run here. And the way that they are run here is above and beyond, so far and away. And those other school districts are very good school districts. But the staff that we have here in Pine-Richland is incredible. I have stood up here, I don't even know how many times now, and you guys talk about community members. What is community? We have to represent community. But you don't listen to us. We stand up here, we take our time, we stand up, we sit here for hours just for the chance to be heard. So, Mrs. Hillman, you can tell me to be quiet and glare at me all you want, but you cannot silence me, and you cannot silence anyone else that chooses to come here and speak. The way that we act in the audience is a direct result of being repeatedly ignored. This is what human beings do. It is the only way we get any attention from you. You don't respond to people's emails. You can't respond to us as we stand here, and that's fine. But don't act surprised when we call things out. It is the only way you actually seem to hear us or acknowledge our existence. I guess as far as no legal implications for the policy.
Your time is up.
I'm done. Yep. Okay.
You're done.
You're not
Next
listening.
person is Katie Postrich.
Katie Postrich. I have 3 kids in the district. So in an elected position, you're representing voices of those who voted for you. But as a school director, you should be representing all voices, including mine and others who did not vote for you. I would argue that prior to COVID, elections were very low turnout. I would argue, this is totally subjective based on my own conversations with community members far beyond this room, that although you like to tote that you won the majority vote, many voting members, especially on non-presidential election years, do not even currently have children enrolled in the district, and the overall margin was very low for all. So that's not really a good argument to me. Share your voices, share your opinions by expressing disagreement through all of your votes and discussions. But for the love of God, and as a Christian I say that, for the love of God, please act ethically and responsibly while doing so. No matter what your intention, signing an agreement such as 011 shows us as a community that even if we didn't vote you into office, we can rest assured that you're going to promise to act in good faith. Much like doctors take the Hippocratic Oath, which is not a requirement to be a provider, but rather a public acknowledgement and reminder that they will promise to uphold their position to do good for their patients. Students sign the policies and agree yearly to codes of conduct, use of technology, etc. Of course, they don't always adhere, and there are consequences. I don't believe there is a direct consequence of not signing it, but I also don't know of any families who wouldn't encourage their kids to sign it and adhere to the policies set forth to help schools run effectively. Some kids learn from a mistake, never do it again, and others keep pushing boundaries as far as they can. Ethical and good faith actions can be extremely valuable to an already split community. That doesn't mean I have to agree with your views and I can vote for an alternative candidate when the time comes, but Policy 011 also gives me, as a voting taxpayer with children actively in the district who never thought I would find myself speaking to the school board, a guideline and ways that I can confront you, any of you, who may not be following an ethical way of governing according to this policy. Your First Amendment rights are absolutely not being taken away by publicly agreeing to promise to do your best. Of course, school boards and directors' involvements have become politicized. Our entire country has. And unfortunately, what should be the current governing by a non-political position has done nothing but polarize our community by using children, educators, administration, and parents as the pawns. Since I have a few seconds left, I just want to also thank you for saying no to Angel Greenwood, because you know what? It's been all over the place. There are books floating all over this community. I personally have been in touch with the author. She plans to
Thank
come
you. Your time is up.
to the
Next speaker,
district,
please.
and hopefully you will listen to her.
Our last speaker is Rebecca Hoffman.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Hoffman, and I have 4 kids who did virtual school, and that was an adventure, and we had fun. I want to take my time tonight to draw attention to the interesting language that was used tonight, stating that directors represent the constituents who voted them in. And I would like to suggest that perhaps the district should revise our mission to every student whose parents voted for the board majority every day. Thank you.
That was our last speaker.
Pardon?
That was
Yep.
our last
Last
speaker.
move? Okay. Let's move to item 4. The meeting is now adjourned. Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Williams, for your help tonight.